At my husband's funeral, a little boy ran up to me and said, "Mom?" Oh, but I'd never seen him before. My heart nearly stopped as his innocent eyes looked up at me with recognition, while my husband Simon's body lay cold in a casket just 10 feet away. I'd been married to Simon for 23 years, and in all that time, he never once mentioned having another child. Yet there stood this boy, about 7 years old, with Simon's same deep-set eyes and that unmistakable dimple in his left cheek. In that moment, surrounded by mourners dressed in black, I realized the man I had loved and buried might have been living a double life all along. If you like stories about shocking family secrets and brave women who overcome betrayal, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new stories every week, and this one will show you how I discovered my late husband's biggest secret, and how it changed my life forever. My name is Amara Okafor, and until 3 days ago, I thought I knew everything about my husband. Simon and I met when I was 22 and he was 25. I had just finished my nursing degree and started working at Mercy General Hospital in Johannesburg. Simon was a visiting medical supplies salesman from Nigeria who swept me off my feet with his charming smile and ambitious dreams. We married within a year and moved to Cape Town to start our life together. We built a beautiful home in the suburbs with a garden that was the envy of all our neighbors. I continued my nursing career, eventually becoming the head nurse of the pediatric department at Cape Town Central. Simon's business grew steadily, requiring him to travel frequently across southern Africa, sometimes for weeks at a time. He always brought me gifts from his trips, colorful fabrics from Zambia, wooden carvings from Zimbabwe, and my favorite chocolate from a special shop in Nairobi. The only shadow in our seemingly perfect life was our struggle to have children. After 5 years of trying, 3 miscarriages, and countless fertility treatments, the doctors told us I would never be able to carry a child to term. The news devastated us both. I threw myself into my work with the children at the hospital, while Simon spent even more time growing his business. "We can still adopt," Simon would say, but somehow we never did. Years passed, and we settled into a comfortable routine. I worked my shifts at the hospital, tended to my garden, and volunteered at a local orphanage on weekends. Simon traveled for business, called me every night when he was away, and brought me those little gifts that I displayed proudly throughout our home. Our marriage wasn't perfect. Whose is? But I thought we were happy. I thought we were honest with each other. I thought I knew the man I shared my bed with for over 2 decades. Then Simon had his heart attack. It happened while he was on a business trip in Durban. I got the call at 2:37 in the morning. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. Just like that, at 52 years old, the love of my life had left me a widow. The next 3 days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, condolence calls, and paperwork. Simon's business partners flew in from Lagos. Old friends called from across the continent. Our house filled with flowers and casseroles from neighbors and colleagues. I moved through it all like a sleepwalker, numb with grief and exhaustion. The funeral was held at our local church, with over 200 people in attendance. Simon had been well liked in our community and respected in his industry. I sat in the front row, clutching a handkerchief and staring at the mahogany casket that held my husband's body. His business partners delivered emotional eulogies about his integrity and generosity. Our pastor spoke of Simon's volunteer work with the church. Our neighbors shared stories of his kindness and humor. I listened to all of it, thinking how lucky I had been to be loved by such a wonderful man, how blessed our years together had been, how empty my life would be without him. And then, as people were filing past the casket to pay their final respects, I felt a small tug on my black dress. I looked down to see a little boy, no more than 7 years old, with deep brown eyes and a dimple in his left cheek. Simon's dimple. "Mom," he said, looking up at me with absolute certainty. "Dad said if anything happened to him, I should find you." I stared at him, uncomprehending. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing or hearing. Before I could respond, a woman rushed up and grabbed the boy's hand. "Kofi, I told you to stay with me," she hissed, her eyes darting nervously between me and the child. She was in her mid-30s, slim and elegant in a simple black dress. I'd never seen her before. "But that's her," the boy Kofiao insisted, pointing at me. "That's my mom. Dad showed me pictures." The woman's face drained of color. "I'm so sorry," she said to me. "This is inappropriate. We'll talk later." She pulled the boy away through the crowd, leaving me frozen in my seat, my world crumbling around me for the second time that week. My friend Miriam, who had been sitting beside me, gripped my hand. "Amara, who was that? What was that about?" Shook my head, unable to speak. The room had started spinning. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. I heard murmurs from the people around us, felt their stares. And then, mercifully, everything went dark. I woke up in the church office, lying on a small couch. Miriam was fanning me with a funeral program, and Pastor Thomas was holding a glass of water. "She's coming around," Miriam said. "Amara, can you hear me?" I nodded weakly, trying to sit up. Pastor Thomas helped me, then handed me the water. "Drink this, Sister Amara. You've had quite a shock." The memory of what had happened came flooding back. The boy, his words, the strange woman. I looked at Miriam and Pastor Thomas, searching, their faces for answers they couldn't possibly have. "That boy," I whispered. "He called me Mom. He said Simon was his father." Pastor Thomas and Miriam exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Do you know anything about this?" I asked them. "Did Simon ever mention another child to either of you?" They both shook their heads. "Never," Pastor Thomas said firmly. "But Amara, perhaps this isn't the best time to ow." "Where did they go?" I interrupted, struggling to my feet. "The woman and the boy. I need to talk to them." "They left," Miriam said gently, putting a hand on my arm. "Right after you fainted. But the woman left this." She handed me a folded piece of paper with a phone number written on it in neat handwriting. Underneath was the name, Grace. I clutched the paper, my mind racing. Who was this Grace? Who was the boy who looked so much like my husband? What other secrets had Simon kept from me during our marriage? "The burial is about to begin," Pastor Thomas said, checking his watch. "Do you feel strong enough to continue, or would you like us to proceed without you?" The thought of not being there to say my final goodbye to Simon was unthinkable, no matter what revelations had just occurred. "I'll be there," I said firmly, straightening my dress. "But afterward, I need answers." I made it through the burial, somehow, mechanically accepting condolences from people whose faces blurred together. All I could think about was the boy's face, oh wow, Simon's face, oh wow, and the slip of paper burning a hole in my pocket. As soon as the last mourners departed, and Miriam had driven me home, I pulled out my phone and the piece of paper. My finger hovered over the keypad. Did I really want to know the truth? Would it change the 23 years I'd spent with Simon? Would it erase the love we'd shared? But I knew I couldn't live with the uncertainty. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. "Hello? This is Amara Okafor," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Simon's wife." There was a long pause. "Yes," the woman finally replied. "I'm Grace. I think we need to talk." "That boy," I said, unable to hold back the question that was consuming me. "Is he Simon's son?" Another pause. "Yes," she admitted. "Kofi is Simon's son. And there's a lot more you need to know. Can we meet tomorrow? I'll come to you." My head was spinning again. "Yes," I agreed. Tomorrow at 10, I'll text you my address. After we hung up, I sat on my couch staring into space, surrounded by sympathy, cards, and flower arrangements. On the mantel, photos of Simon and me smiled down mockingly. Our wedding day, our 15th anniversary trip to Victoria Falls, a Christmas party from just last year. Had it all been a lie? I didn't sleep that night. How could I, knowing that in just a few hours, a woman I'd never met would arrive at my door to tell me about my husband's secret life? I paced the house, alternating between rage and despair. I picked up our wedding photo and hurled it across the room, feeling a moment of satisfaction as the glass shattered. Then I collapsed in tears, gathering the pieces and clutching the photo to my chest. By morning, I had exhausted myself with crying. I showered and dressed mechanically, then made coffee I couldn't drink. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Grace standing there, alone. She was even more elegant than I'd registered at the funeral, with high cheekbones and intelligent eyes. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, but there was something striking about her that made it hard to look away. "Where's the boy?" I asked, suddenly realizing I'd been expecting to see him too. "I left Kofi with a friend," she said. "I thought it would be better if we talked alone first." I nodded and stepped back to let her in. She walked into my living room and stopped, looking at the photos of Simon and me that covered the walls and surfaces. "You had a beautiful life together," she said quietly. "I thought we did," I replied. "Please, sit down." She perched on the edge of my couch, her posture rigid with tension. I sat across from her in Simon's favorite armchair, the one I hadn't been able to sit in since his death. "How long?" I asked simply. Grace took a deep breath. 8 years, she said. "I met Simon at a medical conference in Nairobi. I'm a pharmaceutical rep. He told me he was divorced. The pain that shot through me was physical, like a knife between my ribs. 8 years. While I was tending our garden and working at the hospital and waiting for his calls, my husband had been building another life with this woman." "And the boy?" "Kofi is 7. Simon was there when he was born. He visited Al, every month, sometimes for a week, at a time. He told me his work took him all over Africa, but that he was based in Nairobi." She paused, twisting her hands in her lap. "I only found out about you 2 years ago, when I saw his wedding ring. He'd always taken it off around me before." I tried to process this information. "What did he say when you confronted him?" "He said he couldn't leave you because you were ill and needed him. He said you had a heart condition, and the shock of his leaving might kill you." She looked at me with sudden uncertainty. "That wasn't true, was it?" I laughed bitterly. "I've never been healthier. I'm a nurse, for God's sake." Grace closed her eyes briefly. "I suspected as much, especially this past year. But by then, Kofi adored his father, and I—" She trailed off, but I could finish the sentence in my head. "And I loved him too." "Did he support you financially?" I asked, suddenly wondering if Simon's frequent complaints about business expenses had been covering payments to his second family. Grace shook her head. "I make a good living. He would bring gifts for Kofi, take us on vacation occasionally, but I paid for our home, Kofi's school, everything else." I frowned, puzzled. If money wasn't the motivation, and she wasn't some young beauty he'd been unable to resist, then why? Why had Simon created this parallel life? "There's something else," Grace said, interrupting my thoughts. She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "Simon left this with me about a year ago. He said if anything happened to him, I should bring it to you." I took the envelope with shaking hands. "Did you look inside?" She nodded. "Yes. It's why I came to the funeral. Why I let Kofi come. Simon wanted him to meet you." I opened the envelope, and pulled out several documents. On top was a handwritten letter addressed to me. Below it were what appeared to be bank statements, property deeds, and business papers. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at Grace in confusion. "Read the letter," she said. "I'll wait." I unfolded the letter, recognizing Simon's neat handwriting immediately. "My dearest Amara, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've met Grace and Kofi. I know you must be hurt and confused and angry, and you have every right to feel that way. I've betrayed you in the worst possible manner, and no apology can make up for that. I need you to know that I always loved you. Our marriage was not a lie. But I was a coward who couldn't bear to disappoint you again after all your miscarriages. When I met Grace, I was in a dark place, feeling like a failure as a husband. She was kind to me, and one thing led to another. When I found out she was pregnant, I should have told you the truth then. But I convinced myself I was protecting you, that what you didn't know wouldn't hurt you. Then Kofi was born, and I fell in love with him instantly. I couldn't abandon my son, but I couldn't bear to lose you either. So I lived this double life, hating myself more with each passing year. What you'll find with this letter is the truth about our finances. The medical supply business has done well, better than I ever told you. There are accounts in Nairobi, Lagos, and Johannesburg that you knew nothing about. Properties in 4 countries. It's all legally yours now, as my wife. But I'm asking you, begging you, to share it with Kofi. He's an innocent child who deserves a future. I've left specific instructions with my lawyers, but they will honor your wishes as my legal widow. Grace has her own money. She never wanted mine, but Kofi is my son, and I want him to have what's his by right. I also hope, though I have no right to ask, that you might find it in your heart to know him. He's the best of me, Amara, the only truly good thing I've done. I'm sorry I was too much of a coward to tell you the truth while I lived. I hope in time you can forgive me. Forever yours, Simon. I lowered the letter, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what I had expected. Perhaps declarations of greater love for his mistress, or revelations of even more secret children. But not this. Not this confession of cowardice mixed with genuine remorse. He was going to tell you, Grace said softly. After Kofi turned 10. That was his plan. He said you deserved to know the truth. But he wanted to wait until Kofi was old enough to understand. I looked up at her through my tears. Did you love him? She considered the question seriously. I loved parts of him, she finally said. The parts he showed me. But I always knew there was more he was keeping hidden. Not just you, though that was the biggest secret, but parts of himself. Simon was compartmentalized. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant, even with me, his wife of 23 years. There had been rooms in Simon's heart that remained locked. And Kofi? I asked. What does he know about me? Simon told him that his mom lived far away, but that she was a wonderful woman who would love him if they ever met. He showed him pictures of Yua, usually cropped from larger photos, I realize now. When Simon died, her voice broke slightly. When we got the call, Kofi was devastated. Simon had told him that if anything ever happened, he should find you. That's why he approached you at the funeral. He thinks you're his mother who's been living apart from him. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine the confusion the poor child must be feeling, losing his father and then being rebuffed by the woman he believed was his mother. What do you want from me, Grace? I asked, opening my eyes to look directly at her. She straightened her shoulders. Nothing for myself. I have a good job, a comfortable home. But for Kofi, she hesitated. Simon was the only father he's ever known, and now he's lost him. I'm not asking you to play mother to him, but maybe, someday, you could know him. Let him know you. He has no other connection to his father now. I thought about the little boy with Simon's dimple. My husband's son, created during our marriage in an act of betrayal, but an innocent child nonetheless. A child who had just lost his father, as I had lost my husband. I need time, I said finally. This is all so much to process. Grace nodded and stood up. Of course. Take all the time you need. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a framed photograph, which she placed on the coffee table between us. This is Kofi on his last birthday. Simon was there. I thought you might want to see it. In the photo, my husband, on looking exactly as I remembered Himawa, had his arm around the boy's shoulders. They were both beaming at the camera, their matching dimples on full display. I picked up the frame with trembling hands, studying the image of my husband in this other life he'd created. Thank you for seeing me, Grace said, and I'm truly sorry for your loss. Whatever else he did, I believe Simon loved you very much. After she left, I sat for a long time with the photograph, the letter, and the financial documents spread before me. According to the bank statements, Simon had amassed a fortune I'd known nothing about. Over $5 million in liquid assets, plus the properties in various African cities. All this time, while I'd been carefully budgeting our household, expenses and putting away small amounts from my nursing salary for retirement, my husband had been secretly wealthy. What else hadn't I known about the man I'd shared my life with? The question haunted me as the afternoon stretched into evening, and I remained motionless in Simon's chair, surrounded by the evidence of his deception. The ringing of my phone finally jolted me back to awareness. It was Miriam. Amara? Are you all right? I've been texting you all day. I realized I hadn't looked at my phone since Grace's arrival. I'm sorry, I said, my voice hoarse from crying. I met with that woman from the funeral. Her name is Grace. And what did she want? I laughed humorlessly. To introduce me to my husband's 7-year-old son, Miriam gasped. Simon had another child, are you sure? The boy has his dimple, Miriam, and his eyes, and Grace had pictures of them together. Simon left a letter confessing everything. Oh, Amara. Miriam's voice was filled with compassion. Do you want me to come over? You shouldn't be alone right now. I was about to say yes, to beg her to come and help me make sense of this nightmare, when a sudden thought stopped me. Did you know? I asked. Did anyone know he was living this double life? Of course not. Miriam sounded shocked. Amara. Everyone thought he was a good man. No one suspected anything like this. I wanted to believe her. But doubt had taken root in my heart. If Simon had been able to hide an entire second family from me for 8 years, what else had been hidden? Who else had known? I need to be alone tonight, I told Miriam. But thank you. Maybe tomorrow? After we hung up, I forced myself to get up from the chair. My body felt leaden, as though I'd aged decades in a single day. I moved through the house in a daze, looking at our possessions with new eyes. The antique clock Simon had brought back from a business trip to Mozambique. Had that been a gift from Grace that he'd decided he preferred to keep for himself? The rare first edition book he'd been so proud to find in a little shop in Nairobi. Had he actually bought it while visiting his son? In our bedroom, I opened his closet and ran my hands over his suits, his shoes, his neatly folded sweaters. I brought one of his shirts to my face and inhaled, catching the faint scent of his cologne. Even his smell now seemed like a potential Leah. Had he worn a different cologne when he was with them? I opened his dresser drawers one by one, not sure what I was looking for but unable to stop my desperate search. In the back of the bottom drawer, beneath his socks, my fingers touched something hard. I pulled it out. A small wooden box I'd never seen before, carved with intricate patterns. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a collection of small items. A hospital bracelet labeled Baby Boy Mensa 2.8 kilo. A lock of dark curly hair tied with blue ribbon. A crude drawing of 3 stick figures labeled me, Dad, and Mom. Several small school photos of Kofi at different ages, and a child's tooth wrapped in tissue. I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed I'd shared with Simon for over 2 decades, clutching this box of treasures from his other life. He had kept these precious mementos of his son hidden in our bedroom, just inches from where I slept each night. The enormity of his deception crashed over me anew. This wasn't just an affair, a moment of weakness. This was a sustained, deliberate construction of an alternate reality that he moved between, at will, leaving me in the dark. How could I have been so blind? Had there been signs I'd missed? Clues I'd ignored? I thought back over our years together, searching my memory for moments that might have hinted at his duplicity. There had been the occasional unexplained absences, calls that went straight to voicemail, small inconsistencies in his travel stories, but nothing that had raised serious alarm bells. Simon had been an attentive husband when he was home, calling faithfully when he was away, remembering anniversaries and birthdays, supporting me through my grief after each miscarriage. Had it all been an act? Or had he somehow compartmentalized his life so completely that he could be genuinely present with me while maintaining his relationship with Grace and Kofi? I didn't know which possibility was more painful. One's that my entire marriage had been a performance, or that Simon had been capable of authentic love for multiple families simultaneously. I placed the items back in the box and returned it to the drawer. Then I went to the kitchen, opened the cupboard where we kept the liquor for special occasions, and pulled out a bottle of Simon's favorite whiskey. I didn't normally drink hard alcohol, but tonight was an exception. I poured myself a generous glass and carried it to the patio, where I sat looking out at the garden I'd tended so carefully over the years. The jasmine I'd planted when we first moved in had grown into a magnificent flowering vine that covered the entire back wall. The lemon tree Simon had insisted on, despite my warnings about the climate, had miraculously thrived and now produced fruit year-round. The rose bushes, the herb garden, the bird batha. I had created all of this while Simon was away, on business, some of which I now knew had been time spent with his other family. I sipped the whiskey, welcoming the burn in my throat. What was I going to do with this knowledge? How was I supposed to move forward? And what about the boy, Kofi? None of this was his fault, yet his existence represented the ultimate betrayal of my marriage. But something else nagged at me, a detail from Grace's story that didn't quite fit. She'd said Simon had told her he was divorced when they met. That meant he had deliberately set out to create this second relationship. It wasn't a momentary lapse of judgment or a drunken mistake, and he'd told her I was ill to explain why he couldn't leave me, which was a calculated lie. Yet in his letter, he claimed to have loved me throughout. He said he'd been in a dark place when he met Grace, feeling like a failure after our miscarriages. Was that true? I tried to remember what our life had been like 8 years ago. We'd suffered our third and final miscarriage 9 years ago. It had been the most promising pregnancy, making it to 16 weeks before I lost the baby. The doctors had finally confirmed what they'd suspected. I had a uterine abnormality that made carrying a pregnancy to term nearly impossible. They'd advised us to stop trying. Simon had been devastated. He'd wanted children so badly. For months. Afterward, he'd been withdrawn and depressed, spending more time at work and on the road. I'd been lost in my own grief, unable to reach him through his silence. By the time I'd emerged from the worst of my mourning, Simon seemed to have accepted our childless future. He'd become his usual self again. Attentive, loving, present. Now I wondered, had he really accepted it? Or had he simply found another solution Another woman who could give him the child I couldn't? The thought sent a fresh wave of pain through me. If that was true, if Simon had sought out Grace specifically to have a child, then his betrayal went even deeper than I'd first thought. I finished my whiskey and poured another, even as I recognized the danger of seeking answers at the bottom of a glass. But I needed something to dull the jagged edges of this new reality I found myself in. As the alcohol took effect, my thoughts grew darker. What was left of my life now? My husband was dead. My marriage, I was discovering, had been built partly on lies. I had no children, no close family besides a few distant cousins in Johannesburg. My job at the hospital and my friends were my only anchors now. And then there was Kofi, Simon's son, the child who thought I was his mother. What did I owe this boy? Legally, according to Simon's letter, I could deny him any part of the inheritance. As Simon's legal wife, everything came to me automatically. But morally, could I live with myself if I turned my back on an innocent child who had just lost his father? I must have fallen asleep on the patio chair, because I woke with a start, to the sound of my phone ringing inside the house. Stiff and disoriented, with a pounding headache from the whiskey, I stumbled inside to answer it. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Mrs. Okafor?" An unfamiliar male voice asked. "This is David Nkosi from Nkosi and Partners Legal Services. I'm Simon Okafor's attorney. I need to speak with you regarding your husband's estate. Could you come to my office tomorrow at 11 a.m.? I gripped the phone tighter. "Did you know?" I demanded, my voice rough with sleep and emotion. "Did you know about Grace and Kofi?" There was a brief pause. "Yes, Mrs. Okafor. I was aware of Mr. Okafor's situation. That's one of the matters we need to discuss. I understand you've met Ms. Mensah?" "Yes, she came to see me today. She showed me Simon's letter." My voice broke on my husband's name. "I see. Then you're aware of some of the complexities involved. There's more we need to go through, however. Shall we say 11 tomorrow?" I agreed and hung up, feeling a fresh surge of anger. Simon's lawyer had known about the second family all along. Who else had been complicit in my husband's deception? I showered and made coffee, trying to clear my head. The house felt different this morning, alien and hostile, filled with reminders of a man I was beginning to think I'd never truly known. I needed to get out, to breathe air that wasn't saturated with memories of Simon. I grabbed my purse and car keys and headed for the door. Without conscious decision, I found myself driving toward the beach. Simon and I had often walked along the shore on Sunday mornings, planning our future, dreaming about the children we hoped to have. Now those memories were tainted, like everything else. The beach was nearly empty on this weekday morning. I took off my shoes and walked along the water's edge, letting the cold waves wash over my feet. The vastness of the ocean had always brought me perspective, but today even that comfort eluded me. I didn't know how long I'd been walking when I noticed a small figure ahead, standing at the water's edge. As I got closer, I realized with a shock that it was Kofi. He was alone, throwing stones into the waves with fierce concentration. I stopped, uncertain. Should I approach him? Turn around and leave? Before I could decide, he looked up and saw me. Simon's eyes widened with recognition. "Mom," he called, and began running toward me. My heart raced with panic. I wasn't prepared for this encounter, but I couldn't bring myself to run from a grieving child. So I stood my ground as he approached, his small face alight with hope. "Mom," he said again when he reached me, slightly out of breath. "You came." "Kofi," I said carefully. "Where is your mother? Where is Grace?" His face clouded with confusion. "Grace? She's at home. She thinks I'm at Jamal's house. But I came here because Dad always said this was your favorite place. He said you used to walk here together." Simon had talked about me with his son. The realization was another shock to my system. "Kofi," I said gently, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not You're my mom," he interrupted firmly. "Dad showed me your pictures. He said you lived far away because of your important job, but that someday we'd all be together." My heart broke for this child who had been fed such elaborate lies. "Did your father tell you my name?" I asked. Kofi nodded. "Amara. It means Grace in Igbo. Dad said it was a funny coincidence that my other mom is named Grace in English. So Simon had used my actual name when creating this fantasy for his son. He hadn't even bothered to invent a different identity for me in his parallel life." I looked down at this boy, this miniature version of my husband, and felt a confusing mix of emotions: our anger at Simon, pity for Kofi, and something else I couldn't quite name. "Does Grace know you're here?" I asked. He looked down at his feet. "No, she's been crying a lot since Dad died. I didn't want to make her sad again by talking about you." My heart sank. "Kofi, we need to call Grace right away. She must be worried. Sick about you." His face fell. "Are you mad at me?" "No," I said truthfully. "I'm not mad at you. But we need to let Grace know where you are. Do you have her phone number memorized?" He nodded and recited it. I took out my phone and dialed, turning slightly away from Kofi as the phone rang. Grace answered immediately, her voice frantic. "Hello? Grace, this is Amara Okafor. I'm at Camps Bay Beach with Kofi. He's safe." "Oh, thank God," she gasped. "I just went to check on him at his friend's house and they said he never arrived. I've been searching everywhere. How did he end up with you?" "It seems he came looking for me. Simon told him I often walk on this beach." I glanced at Kofi, who was watching me intently. "We need to talk, but not over the phone. I'll bring him to you. Where are you?" She gave me her address. An apartment in Greenpoint, not far from my house. I told her we'd be there in 20 minutes and hung up. "Am I in trouble?" Kofi asked anxiously. I sighed, looking into his worried face. "Grace was very scared when she couldn't find you. You shouldn't have come here alone." "But I had to find you," he insisted. "Dad said if anything happened to him, you would take care of me. He promised." Another promise Simon had made without consulting me. Another burden he'd placed on my shoulders from beyond the grave. "Let's go see Grace," I said, avoiding a direct response to his statement. "She's waiting for you." As we walked back to my car, Kofi slipped his small hand into mine with the easy confidence of a child who assumes he's loved. The sensation was foreign to me, I'd never held my own child's hand this way, never felt those small fingers trusting in mine. During the drive to Grace's apartment, Kofi chattered constantly, telling me about his school, his friends, his favorite TV shows. Every now and then, he'd drop in a reference to Dad that pierced my heart anew. "Dad said you're a nurse who helps sick children," he said at one point. "Is that true?" "Yes," I admitted. "I'm the head nurse in the pediatric department at Cape Town Central Hospital." He beamed. "Dad said you're the best nurse in all of South Africa. He said you have magic hands that make children feel better." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting back tears. These glimpses into how Simon had spoken about me to his son were disorienting. He'd painted me as some kind of saintly figure, a distant mother too important and special to be present in Kofi's daily life. We arrived at Grace's building, and I parked on the street. Kofi led the way with the familiarity of someone returning home. Grace was waiting at the open door of her apartment, her face etched with worry. When she saw Kofi, she dropped to her knees and pulled him into a fierce hug. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought I'd lost you too." "I'm sorry, Mom," Kofi mumbled into her shoulder. I just wanted to find my other mom like Dad said I should. Grace looked up at me over Kofi's head, her expression a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. Thank you for bringing him home, she said. Please, come in. I hesitated, but my curiosity about their life, Simon's other life, won out. I stepped into the apartment, immediately struck by how different it was from the house Simon and I had shared. Where our home was filled with traditional furniture and African art collected over decades, Grace's apartment was modern and minimalist, with sleek furniture and abstract paintings. The only similarity was the abundance of books. Simon had always been a voracious reader, and I could see his influence in the overflowing bookshelves that lined Grace's living room walls. Kofi, go wash up and change your clothes, Grace instructed. You're covered in sand. Once he was out of earshot, she turned to me. I'm so sorry about this. I had no idea he would try to find you on his own. How did he even know where to look? I asked. Grace sighed. Simon talked about you a lot. Though of course Kofi doesn't know you're Simon's wife. He thinks you're his biological mother, who had to live apart from us because of your important work. Simon would tell him stories about his mom, Amara, who saved children's lives and loved to walk on the beach at sunrise. I shook my head, still struggling to comprehend the elaborate fantasy Simon had constructed. But why? Why tell him I was his mother when he had you? Grace looked away, her expression pained. I think Simon always felt guilty about keeping Kofi from you. In his mind, creating this story was a way of including you in Kofi's life, even if you didn't know about it. That's twisted, I said flatly. Yes, she agreed. It was. Simon could be complicated. She gestured to her sofa. Please sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea? No, thank you. I remained standing, suddenly uncomfortable in this space that belonged to Simon's other life. I should go. I have a meeting with Simon's lawyer at 11. Grace nodded. David Nkosi? He called me this morning too. Of course he had. Simon's careful compartmentalization continued even in death, with separate appointments for his wife and his... What was Grace exactly? Not quite a mistress, since she hadn't known about me at first. Not a second wife, since bigamy was illegal. Just another woman Simon had deceived, albeit in a different way than he'd deceived me. What are you going to tell Kofi? I asked. About me, I mean. Grace ran a hand through her hair, looking exhausted. I don't know yet. He's already lost his father. I don't want to destroy his understanding of his family completely, but I can't let him continue thinking you're his biological mother either. I thought about the little boy who'd held my hand so trustingly, who'd been told all his life that he had two mothers who loved him. I need time to process all this, I said. But I don't want Kofi to be hurt any more than he already has been. Neither do I, Grace said softly. As if summoned by our discussion, Kofi reappeared, his face and hands clean, wearing fresh clothes. Are you leaving? He asked me, his disappointment evident. I nodded. I have an appointment I need to get to. Will you come back? He pressed, moving closer to me. Dad said we'd all live together someday. Now that he's gone, are you going to stay with us? I looked helplessly at Grace, who stepped forward and put her hands on Kofi's shoulders. Kofi, remember what we discussed about Dad being gone? Things are going to be different now. Mrs. Okafor has her own home. But she's my mom too, Kofi insisted, his lower lip beginning to tremble. Dad said so. I couldn't bear the confusion and pain in his face. Without thinking, I knelt down to his level, looking into those eyes so like Simon's. Kofi, your father told you many things about me, and some of them were true. I am a nurse who helps children. I do like to walk on the beach. But our relationship is complicated. I need some time to figure things out. Can you understand that? He considered this seriously, then nodded. Because you're sad about Dad too? Yes, I said, relieved at his perception. I'm very sad about your dad. Me too, he whispered, and then, to my shock, he threw his arms around my neck in a tight hug. I froze for a moment, then awkwardly patted his back, fighting the urge to pull away from this physical embodiment of Simon's betrayal. But Kofi wasn't to blame for his father's sins. Slowly, I returned his hug, feeling something shift inside me as I did. When I stood up, Grace was watching us with an unreadable expression. I'll walk you out, she said. At the door, she handed me a business card, my direct line at work, and my email, in case you want to talk about anything. I took the card and slipped it into my pocket. I'll let you know what the lawyer says, I promised, though I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to do so. As I drove to the lawyer's office, my mind was a jumble of conflicting emotions. The little boy's hug had awakened something in me. Tenderness I'd thought had died with my last miscarriage 9 years ago. But mingled with that tenderness was a deep sense of violation. Simon had used my name, my identity, to create a maternal figure for his son without my knowledge or consent. He'd woven me into their lives in absentia, as if I were a character in a story he was telling, rather than a real person with my own feelings and choices. I arrived at Nkosi & Partners 10 minutes early, but David Nkosi was ready to see me immediately. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His office was imposing, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and a massive desk that seemed designed to intimidate clients. Mrs. Okafor, he said, rising to shake my hand. My deepest condolences on your loss. Simon was a valued client and friend. Friend. The word struck me like a slap. This man had been Simon's friend, yet he had helped him maintain his double life, had been complicit in the deception. How long did you know? I asked without preamble, ignoring his offered hand. About Grace and Kofi. How long did you help my husband lie to me? David Nkosi lowered his hand, his expression grave. Please, sit down, Mrs. Okafor. I understand your anger, but the situation is more complicated than you might think. I remained standing. How long? He sighed. Simon came to me 7 years ago, when Ms. Mensah was pregnant. He wanted to ensure that the child would be provided for financially while maintaining discretion. Discretion, I repeated bitterly. You mean secrecy, deception, lies. I am bound by attorney-client privilege, Mrs. Okafor. I couldn't have disclosed Simon's personal matters to you even if I had wanted to. But you could have refused to help him deceive his wife, I pointed out. You could have told him that what he was doing was wrong. I did, Nkosi said quietly, many times. I urged him to be honest with you, especially after Ms. Mensah discovered your existence. But Simon was determined to maintain the status quo. He believed he was protecting everyone involved. I finally sat down, suddenly exhausted. Protecting us by living a lie? Nkosi leaned forward, his expression earnest. Simon loved you very much, Mrs. Okafor. Whatever else he did, I never doubted that. But after your miscarriages, he felt he had failed you. When he unexpectedly found himself expecting a child with Ms. Mensah, he panicked. He feared that telling you would destroy you, especially coming so soon after your final miscarriage. Shook my head, unconvinced. So instead, he created an elaborate deception that lasted 8 years. He told Kofi that I was his mother? What kind of twisted logic is that? I'm not defending his choices, Mrs. Okafor. I'm merely trying to help you understand them. Nkosi picked up a thick folder from his desk. Now, shall we discuss the practical matters at hand? Simon's will and the distribution of his estate? I nodded reluctantly, bracing myself for more revelations. As Simon's legal wife, you are automatically entitled to inherit his entire estate under South African law, Nkosi began. This includes your shared home, all bank accounts in his name, his business interests, and various properties he acquired over the years. The properties and accounts I knew nothing about, I interjected. Nkosi had the grace to look uncomfortable. Yes, Simon's business was more successful than he led you to believe. The medical supply company has branches in 6 countries now, with annual revenues exceeding 50 million rand. The figure stunned me. Simon and I had lived comfortably but modestly. He had always said the business was doing well enough, but had stressed the need for careful budgeting. Meanwhile, he'd been sitting on a fortune. However, Nkosi continued, Simon executed a will last year that makes specific provisions for Ms. Mensah and Kofi. He left a trust fund for Kofi's education and future needs, with an initial funding of 5 million rand. He also left Ms. Mensah a one-time payment of 2 million rand and ownership of the apartment they shared in Greenpoint. I absorbed this information silently. The amounts were substantial, but according to what Nkosi had just told me about Simon's wealth, they represented only a fraction of his total estate. As his widow, you have the legal right to contest these bequests, Nkosi added. Under South African law, Simon's relationship with Ms. Mensah could be considered adultery, which would invalidate any claims she might make on his estate. And Kofi? I asked. What would happen to his inheritance if I contested the will? Nkosi hesitated. That's more complicated. As Simon's biological child, Kofi has certain rights. However, since he was born outside of marriage, and since you and Simon never legally adopted him, his claim is weaker than it would be otherwise. A court would have to decide. I thought about the little boy who'd hugged me so spontaneously, who'd been raised on stories about his wonderful mother Amara, who would someday be part of his life. None of this was his fault. I won't contest the will, I said firmly. Grace and Kofi should receive what Simon intended for them. Nkosi nodded, looking relieved. I believe that's what Simon would have wanted. He was very concerned about providing for Kofi's future, just not concerned enough to acknowledge him publicly or introduce him to his legal wife, I said dryly. As I said, Simon's reasoning was complex. Nkosi pushed a document across the desk toward me. This is a formal acknowledgement that you've been informed of the provisions in Simon's will and accept them without contest. If you're comfortable signing it today, we can proceed with the distributions immediately. I skimmed the document, then signed it without hesitation. I had no desire to punish Grace or Kofi for Simon's deception, and I certainly had no need for more money than I'd already unexpectedly inherited. There's one more thing, Nkosi said, reaching into his desk drawer. He pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Simon's handwriting. Simon left this with instructions that I give it to you after his will was settled. I took the envelope, my hand trembling slightly. Another letter from beyond the grave. More justifications? More secrets? You can open it here if you wish, Nkosi offered. Or take it with you. I'll take it, I said, slipping it into my purse. I wasn't ready to read more of Simon's words, not with an audience. As I stood to leave, Nkosi cleared his throat. Mrs. Okafor, for what it's worth, I believe Simon truly regretted the pain his choices would cause you. In the last year especially, he spoke often of finding a way to unite his 2 families, to finally be honest with everyone. But he never did, I pointed out. He died with his secrets intact. Yes, Nkosi acknowledged sadly. He ran out of time. I left the lawyer's office, feeling oddly empty. The initial shock and rage had subsided, leaving behind a hollow space where my understanding of my marriage had once been. I drove aimlessly for a while, eventually finding myself back at the beach where I'd encountered Kofi earlier. The tide had come in, covering most of the sand where we'd walked. I sat on a bench overlooking the water and finally took out Simon's second letter. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper and a small key. The letter was brief, written in Simon's familiar hand. My beloved Amara. If you're reading this, you've met with David and learned about the provisions in my will. I hope you can find it in your heart not to contest them. Kofi deserves a future, whatever you may think of me. The enclosed key opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank, downtown branch. Inside is something I've wanted to give you for many years but never found the courage to do so while I lived. It won't make up for my betrayal, but perhaps it will help you understand. I have loved you every day of our marriage, Amara. That was never a lie. Forever yours, Simon. I stared at the small key in my palm. What could possibly be in this safe deposit box that Simon thought would help me understand his betrayal? What object could justify 8 years of deception? The bank would be open for another hour. I could go now and find out, or I could put it off, give myself more time to process everything I'd already learned. Curiosity won out. I drove to the downtown branch of First National Bank and presented the key to a clerk, along with my identification. She led me to a private room where the safe deposit box was brought to me. It was a medium-sized box, heavier than I expected. I set it on the table provided and inserted the key with shaking hands. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a USB drive. I opened the journal to the first page and saw Simon's handwriting. January 15th, 2016. I met someone. Her name is Grace, and she reminds me of Amara when we first met. Bright, ambitious, full of life. I never meant for it to happen. I was in Nairobi for the medical conference, feeling more alone than I have in years, and she was kind to me. We talked all night about everything: medicine, politics, books, our childhoods. I didn't tell her about Amara. I let her believe I was divorced. It was wrong, I know. But for one night, I wanted to escape the weight of failure I've been carrying since the last miscarriage. I should end it now, before it goes any further. I love my wife. Our marriage has weathered so much already, but there's a hollowness in me that Amara can't fill anymore. Not through any fault of hers, but because her pain mirrors my own too closely. When I'm with Grace, I don't feel like the man who couldn't give his wife a child. I'm just Simon, and it's intoxicating. God forgive me for what I'm considering. I flipped through the pages, seeing entry after entry chronicling Simon's relationship with Grace, his feelings when he found out she was pregnant, his conflict about whether to tell me, his joy and guilt when Kofi was born. It was a complete record of his double life, written in his most private thoughts. The final entry was dated just 3 weeks before his death. March 3rd, 2025. The cardiologist confirmed what I've suspected for months. My heart is failing. The medications aren't working as well as they should. He's recommended a procedure, but the success rate at my stage is low. I might have a year left, maybe less. I can't delay any longer. I need to tell Amara the truth. I need to introduce her to Kofi before it's too late. The boy deserves to know his father's wife, and Amara deserves to know the child who might have been hers in another life. I've maintained this deception for too long, telling myself I was protecting everyone when really I was just protecting myself from the consequences of my choices. Next month, when Kofi is on school holiday, I'll bring him to Cape Town. I'll tell Amara everything. It will hurt her deeply, I know. But living with this lie is slowly killing me faster than my heart condition ever could. I can only pray that in time, she might find a way to forgive me, and perhaps even to love Kofi, who is the best thing I've ever done in this life. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. Simon had known he was dying. He'd finally decided to tell me the truth, to introduce me to his son, but his heart had given out before he could do it. With trembling hands, I took out the USB drive and turned it over in my palm. What else had Simon left for me to discover? More secrets? More justifications? I returned the journal to the safe deposit box, but kept the USB drive. I thanked the bank clerk and left, my mind racing with this new information. Simon had been planning to tell me everything. He'd run out of time, not courage. Did that change anything? Did it make his years of deception any less painful? I wasn't sure. I drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets and buildings. Once inside, I went straight to my laptop and inserted the USB drive. It contained a single video file labeled for Amara. I clicked on it, and Simon's face filled my screen. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered him, with shadows under his eyes that I had somehow failed to notice in the weeks before his death. He was sitting in a hotel room I didn't recognize, looking directly into the camera. "Amara," he began, his voice slightly hoarse. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't find the courage to tell you everything in person before I died. It means I failed you one last time. And for that, I am more sorry than words can express." He took a deep breath and continued. "By now you've met Grace and Kofi. You've learned about the double life I've been leading. You're hurt, confused, and angry, and you have every right to be. What I did was unforgivable." Simon looked down briefly, then back at the camera with eyes shining with unshed tears. "I've tried to explain my actions in the journal, but explanations aren't excuses. The truth is simpler and uglier than all my rationalizations. I was a coward. After our last miscarriage, when we found out you couldn't have children, I felt like a failure as a husband. I couldn't give you the one thing you wanted most." He wiped a tear from his cheek. "When I met Grace, it was like a fantasy, chance to escape the pain and disappointment that had become so much a part of our life together. I never meant it to be more than a brief affair, a moment of weakness. But then she got pregnant, and suddenly I had a chance at fatherhood after all. I should have told you then. I should have come clean and faced the consequences, whatever they might have been. Instead, I created this elaborate deception, telling myself I was protecting you from more pain, when really I was just too scared to face your anger and hurt. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, Amara. So instead, I lived this fractured existence, loving you completely when I was with you, and trying to be a father to Kofi when I was with him." Simon leaned closer to the camera. "The most twisted part of all this is that I told Kofi you were his mother. I showed him your pictures. I told him stories about you. In my disturbed thinking, it was a way of giving him the mother he deserved, and giving you the child we'd always wanted, even if only in fantasy. It was wrong and unfair to everyone, especially to you and Kofi. I've recently learned that my heart is failing," he continued. "The doctors give me a year at most. I've decided that before I die, I need to make this right. I need to introduce you to Kofi properly, not as his secret mother, but as my wife. The boy deserves to know the truth about his father, and you deserve to know the amazing child who carries half of my DNA." Simon's face softened. "Kofi is extraordinary, Amara. He's kind and brilliant and funny. He loves books, just like you. He wants to be a doctor someday, to help people. In many ways, he reminds me of you, Aros, your compassion, your determination, your capacity for joy despite hardship. I have no right to ask anything of you, but if I could make one final request, it would be this. Please don't punish Kofi for my sins. Whatever relationship you choose to have with him, whether as a distant aunt-like figure, a friend, or nothing at all, please know that he is innocent in all of this. He believes his father was a good man, and despite everything, I have tried to be a good father to him, even as I failed as a husband to you." Simon wiped away more tears. "I love you, Amara. I've loved you since the day we met, through all our struggles and joy. That has never changed, not once in all these years." What's changed is that I no longer deserve your love in return. I hope someday, long after I'm gone, you might find it in your heart to forgive me, not for my sake, but for your own. You deserve peace and happiness, my love. You always have. The video ended, freezing on Simon's tear-streaked face. I sat motionless, my own tears falling unchecked, as the full weight of Simon's confession settled over me. He had been planning to tell me. He had wanted to introduce me to Kofi properly, to finally unite his two worlds before he died. His heart attack had come too soon, leaving behind this mess for all of us to sort through without him. I thought about the little boy I'd met on the beach, who believed I was his mother. I thought about Grace, who had discovered her partner was married and had somehow found a way to continue the relationship despite that betrayal. I thought about Simon, who had lived with this deception for 8 years, compartmentalizing his life so completely that neither woman had suspected the existence of the other, and I thought about myself, the wife who hadn't noticed them, signs, who had accepted Simon's frequent absences and vague explanations without question. Had I been willfully blind? Had some part of me sensed the truth but chosen to ignore it? The ringing of my phone jolted me from these painful reflections. It was Grace. Amara, I hope I'm not disturbing you. No, I said, quickly wiping my eyes and trying to steady my voice. I found some things Simon left for me. The journal? She asked quietly. I was startled. You knew about it? Not until after he died. He mentioned it in the letter he left for me. He said he'd been keeping a record of everything, and that he'd left it for you to find. I didn't know how to respond to that. There was an awkward silence before Grace spoke again. I'm calling because of Kofi. He's been asking about you constantly since you left. He wants to know when you're coming back. She hesitated. I've tried to explain that you're not actually his mother, that his father told him stories that weren't entirely true. But he's confused and upset. He keeps saying that his dad wouldn't lie to him. My heart ached for the child whose world was crumbling, piece by piece, first losing his father, and now learning that the mother he'd been told about was yet another fiction. I don't know what to do, Grace admitted, her voice breaking slightly. I thought maybe you could talk to him, help him understand. You're the only other person who really knows what Simon was like, who might be able to explain things in a way he could accept. It was a lot to ask. Why should I help clean up Simon's mess? Why should I comfort the child he'd had with another woman while married to me? But even as these bitter thoughts crossed my mind, I remembered the feel of Kofi's small hand in mine, his arms around my neck, his innocent trust, his grief, which mirrored my own. I'll come, I heard myself saying. Tomorrow afternoon, around 3? Thank you, Grace breathed, relief evident in her voice. That would be perfect. And Amara? I'm sorry for everything. I never meant to be part of something that would hurt you so much. After we hung up, I sat for a long time with Simon's journal in my lap, thinking about the tangled web he'd woven around all of us. Grace, Kofi, Mao. We were all victims of his cowardice and deception, each in our own way. Now that he was gone, we had to find a way forward without him, carrying the burdens he'd left behind. That night, I dreamed of Simon. In the dream, we were young again, walking along the beach at sunrise as we used to do. He was telling me about a patient he'd met, a little boy with Simon's own dimpled smile. In the dream, I knew without being told that this was his son, our son, the child we'd never been able to have. I felt no anger, only a deep, peaceful acceptance. I woke with tears on my face, but a curious lightness in my heart. The dream had left me with a sense of possibility that I hadn't felt since discovering Simon's betrayal. Not forgiveness, exactly. Wasn't ready for that, Ross, but perhaps the first step toward understanding. The next day, I arrived at Grace's apartment at precisely 3 o'clock, carrying a small gift bag. Grace opened the door with a grateful smile that didn't quite mask the anxiety in her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading me into the living room where Kofi sat on the couch, clutching a well-worn teddy bear. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "You came back," he exclaimed, jumping up. I nodded, sitting down beside him. "I promised I would, didn't I?" He nodded solemnly. "Mom says Dad told me stories that weren't all true, about you being my real mom." His lower lip trembled. "But why would Dad lie?" I glanced at Grace, who gave me an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, I turned back to Kofi. "Sometimes I began carefully. Grown-ups do things that are hard to understand, even for other grown-ups. Your dad loved you very, very much, Kofi. And he wanted you to have everything good in life, including 2 parents who loved you. But I do have that," Kofi insisted. "I have Mom, and I have you." I shook my head gently. "I'm not your biological mother, Kofi. Grace is your only mom. But your dad and I were married for a long time. We were husband and wife, just like Grace was his partner." I stumbled over how to describe their relationship, settling for the simplest term. Kofi frowned, processing this. "So you're like my stepmother?" I hadn't thought of it that way, but I supposed in a twisted sense, it was accurate. "Something like that," I agreed. "Your dad and I couldn't have children together, even though we wanted to very much. When he met your mom and had you, he was so happy to finally be a father. But he didn't tell me about you, and he didn't tell you about me being his wife. That's where the confusion comes from." "Why didn't he tell?" Kofi asked, his innocent question cutting to the heart of everything. I exchanged glances with Grace again. How do you explain adult failings to a child? How do you preserve their memory of a parent while being honest about that parent's flaws? "Your father was afraid," I said finally. "He was afraid of hurting people's feelings, of making people angry or sad. So instead of telling the truth, which might have been painful at first, but better in the long run, he created stories to try, to make everyone happy. But secrets have a way of coming out eventually, and now we're all having to deal with the confusion those secrets caused." Kofi considered this, his small face serious. "So you're not my real mom, but you were Dad's real wife?" "Yes," I confirmed. "And you didn't know about me until the funeral?" "That's right." He thought for a moment longer. "Are you mad at me? Because Dad kept me a secret?" My heart broke at his question. "No, Kofi. Not at all. None of this is your fault. I'm sad that I didn't get to know you sooner, but I'm not mad at you." "Are you mad at Dad?" This was trickier. I didn't want to poison his memories of his father, but I didn't want to lie to him either. "I'm disappointed in some of the choices your dad made," I said carefully. "But I know he loved you very much, and he loved me too, in his way. Sometimes, people can make bad decisions even when they're trying to do what they think is right." Kofi nodded, seeming to accept this. "Can I still see you sometimes? Even if you're not my real mom?" I reached into the gift bag I'd brought and pulled out a children's book, The Heart and the Bottle by Oliver Jeffers, a story about grief and healing that I often recommended to parents of my patients who had lost loved ones. "I brought this for you," I said, handing him the book. It's about someone who loses someone they love, and how they learn to keep that person in their heart while still moving forward. And yes, I'd like to see you sometimes, if that's okay with your mom. I looked at Grace, who nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I think that would be good for everyone," she said. Kofi took the book and opened it, examining the illustrations with interest. Will you read it to me? He asked. Of course, I agreed, and for the next 15 minutes I read the story while Kofi leaned against my side, his small body warm and trusting. Grace sat across from us, watching with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Part relief, part sadness, part something else entirely. When I finished the book, Kofi remained silent for a moment, absorbing the story's message. Then he looked up at me. I'm keeping Dad in my heart, he declared. Just like in the book. That's a wonderful place for him. I agreed, feeling my own heart expand in a way I hadn't thought possible just days before. He'll always be with you there. After another hour of talking and even some moments of laughter as Kofi showed me his favorite toys and schoolwork, I prepared to leave. At the door, Grace pulled me aside while Kofi was distracted with his new book. Thank you, she said quietly. You didn't have to do this. You could have turned your back on us, and no one would have blamed you. I thought about the anger that had coursed through me when I first learned of Simon's betrayal, the bitterness that had threatened to consume me. It was still there, but muted now, softened by the innocent love of a child who had lost his father and the quiet dignity of a woman who had been deceived in her own way. We're all victims of Simon's choices, I said. Turning my back wouldn't heal anything. Grace nodded. What will you do now? With the business? The money? I had been thinking about this since meeting with the lawyer. The business will continue. Simon's partners know how to run it, and I'll be a silent owner. As for the money, I hesitated, then made a decision. I'll use some of it to establish a foundation for children who've lost parents. Something good should come from all of this. That's beautiful, Grace said. Simon would have approved. I wasn't sure I cared whether Simon would have approved, but I kept that thought to myself. And you? What will you do? Keep working. Raise Kofi. Try to help him understand his father's complexity without losing his love for him. She hesitated. And maybe, if you're open to it, maintain some connection with you. For Kofi's sake, but also, I think Simon was right about one thing. You're an extraordinary woman, Amara. I can see why he never stopped loving you, even when he was betraying you in the worst way possible. It was a strange compliment, but I understood the sentiment behind it. Let's take it one step at a time, I suggested. For now, how about Sunday brunches, twice a month? Kofi can get to know me, and we can figure out what kind of relationship makes sense for all of us. I'd like that, Grace agreed, and I think Kofi would too. As I drove home, I reflected on the bizarre turn my life had taken. In the space of a week, I had lost my husband, discovered his betrayal, met his secret son and the woman he'd shared his life with, and somehow found myself agreeing to regular brunches with them. It wasn't the future I had envisioned for myself, but there was a strange sort of rightness to it, as if the universe were correcting a long-standing imbalance. Simon had kept his two lives separated for 8 years. Now, in death, he had inadvertently brought them together. The boy who should have been our son in another life was now connected to me after all, not through biology or legal adoption, but through a shared love for the flawed man who had been his father and my husband. Over the next month, I settled into a new routine. I returned to work at the hospital, finding comfort in the familiar demands of caring for sick children. I met with Simon's business partners, who were as shocked as I had been to discover his double life. I hired a financial advisor to help me manage the unexpected wealth I'd inherited. And every other Sunday I had brunch with Grace and Kofi, slowly building a cautious friendship with them both. Kofi had adjusted to the truth with remarkable resilience. He still occasionally slipped and called me Mom, but he was learning to think of me as Auntie Amara instead. He loved showing me his schoolwork and telling me about his friends, and I found myself looking forward to our time together. Grace and I developed a tentative rapport, bonded by our shared experience of loving and being deceived by the same man. We never became close friends. There was too much complicated history between us for that. But we established a respectful relationship built around Kofi's well-being. But beneath the surface of this new normal, questions continued to nag at me. How had Simon managed to maintain his deception for so long without either of us catching on? Were there signs I had missed? People who had known and kept his secret? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Simon couldn't have orchestrated such an elaborate double life entirely on his own. I began to investigate, starting with a closer examination of Simon's financial records. The lawyer had given me access to all his accounts, and what I found raised more questions than it answered. There were large withdrawals and transfers that couldn't be accounted for by his support of Grace and Kofi, or his business expenses. Where had that money gone? I also discovered frequent calls in his phone records to numbers I didn't recognize, none of which belonged to Grace. Who else had Simon been in regular contact with? And why? One evening, as I was sorting through a box of Simon's personal items from his office, I found a small address book I'd never seen before. It contained names and numbers that weren't in his phone contacts, people he'd kept separate from his digital life, perhaps as an additional layer of secrecy. One name appeared repeatedly throughout the book: Michael Adebayo. There were multiple numbers listed for this person, as well as addresses in Cape Town, Nairobi, and Lagos. The name wasn't familiar to me, and Simon had never mentioned a close friend or business associate by that name. I took out my phone and dialed the most recently listed Cape Town number for Michael Adebayo. After several rings, a deep male voice answered. "Hello?" "Hello," I said, suddenly uncertain how to proceed. "My name is Amara Okafor. I'm Simon Okafor's wife. He passed away recently." There was a long pause. "Yes, I heard. My condolences, Mrs. Okafor." "Thank you. I found your contact information in Simon's address book, and I was wondering, did you know my husband well?" Another pause. "We had business dealings over the years. May I ask why you're calling?" Something in his tone made me cautious. "I'm trying to tie up loose ends after Simon's death," I said vaguely. "He mentioned you several times." This was a lie, but I wanted to see how he would react. Did he? The man sounded genuinely surprised. "That's interesting. Look, Mrs. Okafor, I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm rather busy at the moment. Perhaps we could meet sometime to discuss whatever it is you need to know." "Yes, I'd like that," I agreed quickly. "When would be convenient for you?" "Tomorrow evening, say 7 o'clock at the Cape Grace Hotel bar. I'll be wearing a blue blazer." I agreed to the meeting and hung up, my mind racing. Why would this man, who claimed to have only had business dealings with Simon, suggest meeting at an upscale hotel rather than an office? And why had he sounded so surprised that Simon might have mentioned him to me? The next evening, I arrived at the Cape Grace Hotel 10 minutes early, choosing a seat with a good view of the entrance. At precisely 7, a tall, distinguished-looking man in his late 50s entered the bar, wearing the promised blue blazer. He scanned the room, and I raised my hand slightly to catch his attention. As he approached my table, I was struck by his bearing. Confident, almost regal, with the easy grace of someone accustomed to power and respect. He extended his hand, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mrs. Okafor, I presume? Michael Adebayo. A pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." I shook his hand, noting his firm grip. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Mr. Adebayo. Please, call me Michael." He signaled to a waiter. "May I get you something to drink?" I asked for a glass of white wine, and he ordered the same, along with some appetizers. Once the waiter had gone, he turned his full attention to me. "Now, how can I help you, Mrs. Okafor?" "Amara, please," I said. "I'm trying to understand certain aspects of Simon's life that I've discovered since his death. Your name appears frequently in his personal address book, yet he never mentioned you to me." I'm curious about your relationship with my husband." Michael's expression remained pleasant, but I noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "Simon, and I met about 10 years ago at a business conference in Lagos. I'm in import-export, primarily medical supplies, which overlapped with Simon's business. We did some deals together over the years. This seemed plausible enough, but something felt off." "Just business?" I pressed. "Nothing personal?" Michael hesitated. "We occasionally played golf together when he was in Lagos or I was in Cape Town, but we weren't close friends, if that's what you're asking." Our drinks arrived, giving him a moment's reprieve from my questioning. He took a sip of his wine, then set the glass down carefully. "Mrs. Okafor." "Amara, Forgive my bluntness, but why are you really here? What is it you're looking for?" I decided to take a risk. "I know about Grace and Kofi," I said quietly, watching his reaction closely. To my surprise, he didn't look shocked or confused. Instead, he sighed deeply, as if relieved that the pretense was over. So you've discovered Simon's other family. I wondered if that might be what this was about." "You knew?" I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. "Yes," he admitted. "I knew." "For how long?" "Since the beginning. I was in Nairobi when Simon met Grace at that conference. I was the one who introduced them, in fact. This was unexpected." "You introduced them, knowing Simon was married?" Michael looked uncomfortable for the first time. "It wasn't like that. It was just a professional introduction at first. Simon was looking for pharmaceutical contacts, and Grace was one of the best reps in East Africa. I had no idea it would develop into anything personal. But you knew when it did," I pressed, "and you didn't tell me." He had the grace to look ashamed. "No, I didn't tell you. Simon was my friend, and I didn't feel it was my place to interfere in his marriage. When Grace became pregnant, he was distraught, conflicted. He came to me for advice." "And what did you advise?" I asked, though I thought I could guess the answer. "I told him to be honest with you," Michael said, surprising me. "I told him that secrets like that have a way of coming out eventually, and the longer he waited, the worse it would be. But he was convinced that telling you would destroy you, especially coming so soon after your last miscarriage. He said you were still fragile, that you might harm yourself if you found out." I stared at him, incredulous. "That's absurd. I'm a nurse. I deal with trauma every day. I was sad about the miscarriages, of course, but I was never suicidal or unstable." Michael spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "That's what he believed, or at least what he told me he believed. And once Kofi was born, Simon became even more entrenched in his double life. He convinced himself he was protecting everyone in you, from the pain of his betrayal, Grace from the stigma of being a mistress, and Kofi from growing up without a father." I shook my head, still struggling to comprehend Simon's twisted logic. "And you? What was your role in all this?" Michael took another sip of his wine. "I became a sort of facilitator, I suppose. When Simon needed to visit Grace and Kofi in Nairobi, I would sometimes provide business reasons for him to travel there. If there were phone calls or messages he needed to keep private, he would sometimes route them through me. I didn't like it, but I went along with it because I believed Simon truly loved both you and his son, and was trying to do what he thought was right for everyone." "Right for everyone," I repeated bitterly. "Except it was all based on lies." "Yes," Michael acknowledged. "It was. And as the years passed, Simon became increasingly stressed about maintaining those lies. The last time I saw him, about a month before he died, he told me he couldn't continue living this way. He said his heart was giving out, literally and metaphorically, and he needed to tell you the truth before it was too late. This aligned with what I'd read in Simon's journal and seen in his video confession, but something still didn't add up. "The financial records," I said. "There are large sums of money unaccounted for. More than Simon was sending to Grace and Kofi. Do you know where that money went?" Michael's expression changed subtly, a flicker of something like concern crossing his face. "I'm afraid I don't know the details of Simon's finances." "I think you do," I countered. "Simon trusted you enough to make you part of his deception. He must have trusted you with other secrets as well." Michael glanced around the bar, then leaned closer. "Amara, some questions are better left unasked. Simon is gone. You have inherited his wealth, his business. You have even formed a relationship with Grace and Kofi, which speaks to your extraordinary character. Perhaps it would be best to leave the past in the past." His evasion only strengthened my determination to know the truth. "I deserve to know who my husband really was," I said firmly. "All of it, not just the parts he chose to show me or the parts that have been revealed since his death. If you won't tell me, I'll keep looking until I find the answers myself." Michael studied me for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "You're right, you do deserve to know, but not here." He glanced around the crowded bar again. "Do you have a car? Follow me to my house. We can speak more freely there." I hesitated. I didn't really know this man, and going alone to his house seemed potentially unwise. Reading my reluctance, Michael smiled reassuringly. "I understand your caution. How about this? I'll text you my address, and you can meet me there in half an hour. Feel free to share my details with someone you trust, for safety. My housekeeper will be there as well, so you won't be alone with me." This seemed reasonable. I agreed to the plan, and Michael paid for our drinks before leaving. I texted Miriam the address and details of who I was meeting, just as a precaution, then drove to the address Michael had sent. It was an impressive mansion in the exclusive Bishop's Court area, set behind high walls with a state-of-the-art security system. Michael met me at the gate and led me inside to a spacious living room decorated with African art and antiques. As promised, a middle-aged woman was tidying the kitchen visible through an open doorway. "That's Mrs. Kumalo, my housekeeper," Michael explained. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Another glass of wine?" I declined, wanting to keep a clear head. "I'd prefer if we could just continue our conversation." Michael nodded and gestured for me to sit on one of the plush sofas. He took a seat opposite me, his expression grave. "What I'm about to tell you must remain between us," he said seriously. "Not for my sake, but for yours, and possibly for Kofi's future security. Do you understand?" I nodded, intrigued and alarmed by his tone. "Simon's medical supply business was legitimate," Michael began, "but it was also the perfect cover for other activities. About 9 years ago, shortly after your last miscarriage, Simon was approached by some powerful people in Lagos. They needed someone with his connections and his clean reputation to help move certain goods and funds between countries." My stomach clenched. "Are you saying Simon was involved in something illegal?" "Not exactly illegal," Michael hedged. "More unofficial. There are aspects of African politics and business that operate in gray areas. Simon became a facilitator for certain transactions that needed to remain private." "Money laundering?" I asked bluntly. Michael winced. "That's a harsh term. Think of it more as financial diplomacy. Simon helped wealthy individuals and sometimes government officials move their assets discreetly. In return, he received substantial commissions, which is where that unaccounted-for money in his records comes from." I tried to process this information. My husband, the man I'd believed was running a straightforward medical supply business, had apparently been involved in shady financial dealings for powerful people. It was yet another layer of deception, another aspect of Simon's life he'd kept hidden from me. Was he blackmailed into this? I asked, trying to understand how Simon could have become involved in such activities. Threatened somehow? Michael shook his head. No, it was entirely voluntary. Simon was approached precisely because of his reputation for integrity. The initial proposition was presented as a way to help certain government health initiatives receive funding without bureaucratic delays. It seemed like a win-win arose, helping medical programs while earning extra income. But over time, the nature of the transactions changed, becoming more complex and involving higher stakes. And Grace? Did she know about this part of Simon's life? No, Michael said firmly. She knew only about the legitimate business, just as you did. Simon kept that aspect of his activities separate from both of his families. I sat back, feeling overwhelmed by these revelations. So my husband wasn't just living a double life with a secret family. He was also involved in questionable financial dealings that none of us knew about. Simon compartmentalized his life to an extraordinary degree, Michael acknowledged. It's one of the reasons he was so effective in these financial matters. He could keep secrets better than almost anyone I've known. A disturbing thought occurred to me. These powerful people Simon was working for, do they know he's dead? Are they aware that I've inherited his business and financial records? Could they be a danger to me or to Grace and Kofi? Michael looked uncomfortable. That's one of the reasons I decided to tell you the truth. There could be some risk, yes. Simon was in the process of extracting himself from these arrangements when he died. He told his contacts he had a heart condition and needed to simplify his life. Most were understanding and had begun transferring their business to other facilitators, but a few were resistant to letting him go. My blood ran cold. Are you saying someone might have wanted Simon dead? No, Michael said quickly. His heart attack was genuine, I'm certain of that. Simon had been having cardiac issues for over a year, but his death has left some unfinished business. There are transactions that were in progress, contacts who expected certain services that now won't be provided, and they might come looking for me, I concluded. It's possible, Michael admitted. Which is why I'm telling you this now. You need to be careful, especially with the financial records. If the wrong people discover you're investigating Simon's activities, they might become concerned about what you know or what you might do with that knowledge. I thought about the hours I'd spent poring over Simon's accounts, making notes, asking questions at the bank. Had I already drawn attention to myself? What should I do? I asked. First, stop digging into the financial records, at least temporarily. Second, consider appointing a trusted manager to oversee the legitimate business, so it appears that you're not taking an active role. Third, I can help you identify and secure any sensitive information that might be in Simon's files. And finally, you might want to consider taking a trip for a while, perhaps visiting family abroad, until things settle down. His suggestions made sense, but I wasn't ready to run away from my life or stop seeking the truth about my husband. I appreciate your concern, Michael, but I can't just pretend none of this is happening. I need to understand exactly what Simon was involved in and what risks it might pose to me and to Kofi. Michael sighed. I understand. In that case, let me at least help you navigate this situation as safely as possible. Simon was my friend, and I feel a responsibility to protect his family. Both his families. For the next 2 hours, Michael explained the complexities of Simon's unofficial financial activities. Most involved moving money between accounts, in different countries, disguised as business transactions for medical supplies. Some of the funds came from legitimate, but private sources or wealthy individuals avoiding taxes or public scrutiny. Others came from more questionable origins, or government officials skimming from public funds, businesses paying bribes for contracts, even some suspected criminal enterprises laundering their profits. Simon had been careful to maintain plausible deniability. The transactions were structured to appear legitimate on the surface, with proper documentation and reasonable explanations. But the web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and circular transfers created a complex maze that would be difficult for authorities to untangle without inside information. The most concerning connection, Michael explained, showing me a diagram he'd drawn, is with a Nigerian government official named Ibrahim Okonkwo, He's used Simon to move several $1 million over the past 5 years, and he's not someone you want to cross. He's powerful, connected, and ruthless when he feels threatened. And is he likely to feel threatened by Simon's death? I asked. Possibly. He had a major transaction planned for next month that Simon was supposed to facilitate. If that falls through or attracts unwanted attention, Okonkwo might look for someone to blame. By the time I left Michael's house, it was after midnight, and my head was spinning with all I'd learned. Simon had been living not just a double life, but a triple one, a husband to me, father to Kofi, and financial facilitator for wealthy, and sometimes dangerous people. Each role had been kept carefully separated from the others, with only Simon himself maintaining the connections between these disparate worlds. As I drove home, I wondered if I had ever really known my husband, at all. The man I'd loved for 23 years had been capable of extraordinary deception, lying to me about Kofi, lying to Grace about his marriage, and lying to both of us about his financial activities. Yet he had also been capable of genuine love, both for me and for his son. He had built a successful, legitimate business while simultaneously running a shadow operation. He had maintained these separate lives for years without slipping up or breaking character. Who was the real Simon Okafor? The loving husband who called every night when he was away? The devoted father who kept a box of Kofi's baby mementos hidden in our bedroom? The shrewd businessman who had amassed millions without my knowledge? Or the morally compromised facilitator who had helped powerful people hide their wealth and possibly their crimes? Perhaps he had been all of these things simultaneously, compartmentalized, as Michael had said, but still integrated within himself in some way I couldn't understand. Or perhaps the strain of maintaining these separate identities had eventually contributed to his heart failure, the stress literally killing him from the inside out. When I arrived home, I was surprised to find Grace's car in my driveway and lights on in my house. I approached cautiously, remembering Michael's warnings about potential danger. Through the front window, I could see Grace pacing in my living room, her expression anxious. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. "Grace? What are you doing here? Is Kofi all right?" She whirled around, relief washing over her face. "Amara, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. Where have you been?" "I was meeting someone who knew Simon," I explained, closing the door behind me. I turned my phone off. "What's happened? How did you get into my house?" "Simon gave me a key years ago, for emergencies," Grace admitted. "I've never used it before tonight, I swear. But I had to find you." She pulled out her phone and showed me a text message. "Tell Simon's wife to stop asking questions if she wants to stay healthy. Final warning." "I received this about 4 hours ago," Grace said, her voice shaking. "I tried calling you, but it went straight to voicemail. I was afraid. I thought maybe whoever sent this had already gotten to you." I sank onto the couch, staring at the threatening message. It seemed Michael's warnings had been well-founded. My investigations had indeed attracted unwelcome attention. "Do you know who sent it?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Grace shook her head. "The number is blocked. I have no idea who it could be from or what questions they're referring to. Amara, what's going on? What have you gotten yourself into?" I hesitated, unsure how much to tell her. Would knowing about Simon's shadowy financial activities put her and Kofi in more danger? Or would ignorance leave them vulnerable? "Where is Kofi?" I asked. "He's with my sister tonight. I didn't want to bring him here when I didn't know what was happening. That was a relief, at least." I made a decision. "Grace, there's more to Simon's life than either of us knew. It's not just that he had 2 families. He was also involved in some questionable financial activities, moving money for powerful people who didn't want it traced. I've been investigating his record since his death, trying to understand where certain funds came from and went to. Someone obviously doesn't like my questions." Grace stared at me, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to anger. "Are you saying Simon was some kind of criminal? That he was laundering money? Not exactly criminal, I said, echoing Michael's evasive language. More operating in gray areas. But yes, essentially helping people hide money, some of which may have come from illegal sources. Grace sat down heavily beside me. First, I find out he's married. Now this. Did either of us know him at all? I'm beginning to think we didn't, I admitted. At least, not completely. We sat in silence for a moment, both processing this latest revelation about the man we'd shared without knowing it. This text, Grace said finally, holding up her phone again. How serious do you think the threat is? Should we go to the police? I thought about what Michael had told me about Ibrahim Okonkwo and the other powerful people Simon had worked for. I don't think the police can help us. These people are too well connected. And what would we tell them? That my late husband was involved in questionable financial transactions, and now someone is threatening us? We'd be implicating ourselves. So, what do we do? Grace asked, fear evident in her voice. I need to stop digging, at least for now. Make it clear I'm not a threat to whoever sent that message. I thought for a moment. And I think you and Kofi should go away for a while. Visit family, take a vacation. Somewhere no one would think to look for you. Grace looked alarmed. You think we're in danger too? Kofi is just a child. I don't know if you're in danger, I said honestly. But I'd feel better knowing you were both somewhere safe until I can figure this out. And what about you? Grace demanded. If we're not safe, neither are you. You should come with us. The suggestion took me by surprise. Grace and I had developed a cautious friendship over the past month, but I hadn't expected her to be concerned for my safety. I can't just leave, I said. I have my job and I need to deal with this situation, but I'll be careful, I promise. Grace looked unconvinced. Amara, these people threatened your life. They know where I live, how to contact me. They could just as easily come after you directly. Please, reconsider. My sister has a house in a small village near Durban. We could all go there for a few weeks, just until things cool down. I was touched by her concern, but still resistant to the idea of running away. Let me think about it, I conceded. In the meantime, you should go home and pack some essentials for you and Kofi. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even your sister until you get there. And leave your cell phone behind. Get a new one that can't be traced to you. Grace nodded, her expression grim. This feels like a bad dream, she murmured. First Simon dies, then I meet his wife, and now we're running from some shadowy criminals he was involved with. How did this become my life? I reached out impulsively and squeezed her hand. I'm asking myself the same question, but we'll get through this, Grace. For Kofi's sake, if nothing else. After Grace left, I sat in my living room considering my options. I could take Grace's advice and go with them to Durban, putting distance between myself and whoever had sent that threatening message. But that felt like surrendering, like letting Simon's secrets continue to control my life even after his death. I thought about Michael Adebayo, who had known about Simon's various deceptions and had helped facilitate some of them. Could I trust him? He seemed genuinely concerned for my safety, but he had also been complicit in Simon's activities. His loyalty had been to Simon, not to me. And what about Simon's lawyer, David Nkosi? He had known about Grace and Kofi, but did he also know about Simon's questionable financial dealings? Would he help me if I went to him with what I'd learned? One thing was certain. I couldn't continue my investigations openly. I needed to be more careful, more discreet, and I needed allies I could trust, completely. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew I could rely on without reservation. Miriam? It's Amara. I need your help with something important, and it might be dangerous. Miriam arrived at my house an hour later, her normally cheerful face serious as I explained the situation. She listened without interruption as I told her about Michael Adebayo, Simon's shadowy financial activities, and the threatening message sent to Grace. "Amara," she said when I finished, "this is way beyond anything I expected. I thought maybe Simon had gambling debts or something, not that he was some kind of international money man for criminals and corrupt officials." "I know," I agreed. "I can hardly believe it myself. But the evidence is there in his financial records, and Michael confirmed it." "Can you trust this Michael person?" Miriam asked skeptically. "He was involved in Simon's deception for years. He could be trying to manipulate you for his own reasons." I had considered this possibility. "I don't trust him completely," I admitted. "But what he told me makes sense of the financial irregularities I found in Simon's records. And he seemed genuinely concerned for my safety." Miriam nodded thoughtfully. "So what's your plan? Are you going to Durban with Grace and Kofi?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm not running away, but I need to make whoever sent that threat believe I've backed off. I need to appear to be focusing on my normal life, on Simon's legitimate business, not on his secret activities." "While secretly continuing to investigate," Miriam guessed, knowing me too well. "Yes," I confirmed, "but more carefully and with help." I looked at her meaningfully. "Of course I'll help you," Miriam said immediately. "But Amara, I don't know anything about financial investigations or tracking down shadowy criminals." "No, but you know people," I pointed out. "Your brother-in-law is a detective with the police, isn't he? And your cousin works at First National Bank? We need information from sources that can't be traced back to me." Miriam nodded slowly. "I see where you're going with this. I can ask questions that might raise eyebrows coming from Simon's widow. But Amara, we need to be very careful. If these people are as dangerous as you think, they won't hesitate to threaten anyone who gets in their way." "I know," I acknowledged. "That's why I want you to consider carefully before agreeing to help me. This could put you at risk too." Miriam looked at me steadily. "Simon was James's friend too," she said, referring to her husband. "If he was involved in something illegal or dangerous, we want to know about it as much as you do. Besides, I'm not leaving you to face this alone." Her loyalty brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I said simply. We spent the next few hours developing a strategy. Miriam would approach her brother-in-law, Detective Thabo Ndlovu, with a carefully crafted story about concerns regarding Simon's business partner in Lagos. She wouldn't mention the threatening message or my suspicions about money laundering, but would ask Thabo to look into the background of Ibrahim Okonkwo as a potential business connection. Meanwhile, I would visibly step back from my investigation of Simon's finances. I would return to work full-time, attend social events, and generally behave like a widow focused on rebuilding her life rather than uncovering her late husband's secrets. I would also follow Michael's advice to appoint a trusted manager for Simon's legitimate business, creating another layer of separation between myself and any questionable activities. "What about Grace and Kofi?" Miriam asked. "Do you really think they're in danger?" "I don't know," I admitted. The threat was sent to Grace but was meant for me. It could mean they're watching her to get to me, or it could have just been the easiest way to send me a warning. Either way, I think they'll be safer away from Cape Town for a while. "And what about you? Will you be safe here alone?" I hadn't considered that. "I could ask my cousin Thembeka to stay with me for a few weeks," I suggested. "She's been wanting to visit Cape Town anyway, and having someone else in the house would make me feel more secure." Miriam nodded approvingly. "Good idea. And maybe get a security system installed, if Simon didn't already have one." "He did," I confirmed, "but I'll have it upgraded and add cameras." By the time Miriam left, it was nearly dawn. I felt exhausted, but also more focused than I had been since discovering Simon's betrayal. Having a plan, even a risky one, gave me a sense of purpose and control that had been lacking since his death. Over the next week, I put our strategy into action. I returned to work at the hospital, telling my colleagues I needed the routine and purpose after weeks of dealing with Simon's estate. I contacted a security company and had my home system upgraded with the latest technology, including motion sensors and cameras that I could monitor from my phone. I called my cousin Thembika in Johannesburg and invited her to stay with me for as long as she wanted, hinting that I was struggling with loneliness after Simon's death. I also met with Simon's business partners and appointed one of them, Thomas Kumalo, as the new managing director of Okafor Medical Supplies. Thomas had worked with Simon for over 15 years and knew the legitimate side of the business inside out. If he was aware of Simon's shadowy financial activities, he gave no indication of it during our meeting. Grace and Kofi left for Durban 3 days after receiving the threatening message. Grace had told her employer she needed time off to deal with a family emergency and had withdrawn Kofi from school temporarily, citing the same reason. She promised to call me from a new, untraceable phone once they were safely at her sister's house. On the surface, I was the picture of a widow returning to normal life after the initial shock of bereavement. But beneath this carefully constructed façade, the investigation continued. Miriam reported that her brother-in-law had agreed to look into Ibrahim Okonkwo, though he had seemed puzzled by the request. Thabo says the name sounds familiar to him, but he can't place why, she told me. He's going to make some discreet inquiries through his contacts. Meanwhile, I maintained regular contact with Michael Adebayo, meeting him for coffee or drinks once a week in public places around Cape Town. I wanted whoever was watching me to see that I was connected to Michael, hoping his reputation and connections might offer some protection. I also wanted to keep him close, to observe his reactions and try to determine how much I could trust him. During one of these meetings, about 2 weeks after receiving the threatening message, Michael revealed something that changed the course of our investigation. "I've been making inquiries of my own," he told me, keeping his voice low despite the noise of the busy cafe where we were sitting. "Trying to find out who might have sent that threat to Grace." "And?" I prompted when he hesitated. "And I've heard some concerning rumors. Apparently, Ibrahim Okonkwo believes Simon was skimming money from the transactions he handled. Significant amounts, possibly millions of dollars. He thinks Simon was planning to disappear, fake his death, and start a new life somewhere, with the stolen funds." I stared at him, stunned. "That's ridiculous. Simon died of a heart attack in a hospital. There were doctors, nurses, an official death certificate. It wasn't faked." "I know that," Michael agreed. "But Okonkwo is suspicious by nature, and apparently there were some irregularities in the last few transactions Simon handled for him. Money that can't be accounted for. Okonkwo believes Simon diverted those funds to a secret account, and that you might know where that money is." "But I don't," I protested. "I've been through all of Simon's accounts, and yes, there are some I didn't know about before, but there's no mysterious fortune hidden away somewhere." Michael looked troubled. "The problem is, someone has been accessing one of Simon's secure email accounts since his death. Emails have been sent to contacts in Lagos and Nairobi, making arrangements for transactions that Simon would have handled. Okonkwo believes you're continuing Simon's operations while pretending to be an innocent widow." This revelation sent a chill through me. "Someone has been using Simon's email? Who?" "That's what I've been trying to figure out," Michael said. "It has to be someone who had access to Simon's passwords and knew how he communicated with his contacts. Someone familiar with his business methods." My mind raced through the possibilities. Simon's business partners? His lawyer? Michael himself? Or someone I hadn't even considered? "Could it be Grace?" I asked, hating to voice the suspicion but needing to consider all possibilities. "Could she have known more about Simon's activities than she's admitted?" Michael shook his head firmly. "I don't believe so. Simon was extremely careful to keep that part of his life separate from both of his families. Besides, the emails have continued since Grace and Kofi left for Durban. Unless she took Simon's laptop with her." "She didn't," I confirmed, remembering how hastily they had packed, taking only essentials. But someone has Simon's passwords. Someone is pretending to be him, or to be working on his behalf. And that someone might be the same person who sent the threat to Grace. It would make sense, Michael agreed. If someone is trying to continue Simon's operations without authorization from people like Okafor, they would want to stop you from investigating and potentially exposing them. I thought about the implications of this new information. So I'm not in danger because I was asking questions about Simon's past activities, but because someone is currently using his name and connections for their own purposes, and they're afraid I'll interfere. Exactly, Michael said. And that makes the situation even more dangerous. This isn't about past secrets anymore. It's about ongoing criminal activity. I needed to warn Grace, to make sure she and Kofi remained safely hidden. And I needed to find out who was impersonating Simon in these financial transactions. Can you get me access to Simon's email account? I asked Michael. The one that's being used to send these messages? He hesitated. It would be risky. If whoever is using it realizes we're monitoring the account, they might disappear, or worse, decide to eliminate the threat directly. I understand the risk, I said firmly. But it might be our best chance to identify who's behind this. They don't know that we know about the emails. We have the element of surprise for now. Michael considered this, then nodded reluctantly. I'll see what I can do. Simon gave me emergency access to some of his accounts, though I've never used it. I might be able to get into this one as well. As we parted ways, I felt a renewed sense of urgency. What had begun as an investigation into my husband's past had evolved into something far more immediate and dangerous. Someone was actively using Simon's identity and connections, possibly stealing from dangerous people like Ibrahim Okonkwo, and was willing to threaten violence to protect their scheme. The next day brought another shocking development. Miriam called me at work, her voice tense with suppressed excitement. Thabo found something about Ibrahim Okonkwo, she reported. He's wanted by Interpol for corruption and money laundering. Apparently, he embezzled millions from Nigeria's health ministry over the past decade. He was a high-ranking official until last year when the new government came in and started investigating his department. He fled the country just ahead of arrest warrants. This explained why Simon had been helping Okonkwo move money internationally. The man had been stealing public funds meant for healthcare and hiding them abroad. But here's the really interesting part, Miriam continued. Guess who used to work directly under Okonkwo at the health ministry before moving to the private sector? Grace Mensah. I nearly dropped the phone. Grace? Are you sure? Positive. Thabo found her employment records. She worked for the Nigerian Ministry of Health from 2012 to 2016 in the pharmaceutical procurement division that Okonkwo oversaw. She left to become a pharmaceutical rep about a year before she met Simon. My mind reeled with the implications. Grace had worked for Ibrahim Okonkwo, the same man who had later become one of Simon's most important clients for his unofficial financial services. Was that truly a coincidence? Or had Grace been more involved in Simon's activities than I had believed? Amara, are you still there? Miriam's voice brought me back to the present. Yes, I'm here. I'm just processing this information. It creates a connection I wasn't aware of. Thabo thinks it might not be a coincidence, Miriam said. He wonders if Grace was deliberately placed in Simon's path, either by Okonkwo or by someone else, to establish a personal connection that could be leveraged for these financial transactions. You mean Kofi? Their relationship? It was all a setup from the beginning? The possibility was almost too painful to contemplate, not just for what it would mean about my marriage, but for what it would mean for Kofi, who might have been conceived as part of some elaborate scheme. We don't know that, Miriam cautioned. It's just a theory Thabo is considering, but the connection is suspicious. Has Thabo reported any of this to his superiors? I asked, suddenly concerned about official involvement. Not yet. He wanted to gather more information first, and to talk to you. He's asking if you'll meet with him privately, off the record. I agreed to the meeting, my mind still spinning with questions about Grace. Could she have been part of Simon's deception? From the beginning? Was she still involved? Perhaps even the one using his email account to continue his operations? Was her flight to Durban with Kofi genuine concern for their safety, or a convenient way to distance herself from what was happening? In Cape Town, I remembered her apparent shock and anger when I told her about Simon's shadowy financial activities. Had that been an act? Or had she truly been unaware of that aspect of Simon's life, despite her prior connection to Okonkwo? I called the new number Grace had given me, but it went straight to voicemail. This wasn't necessarily suspicious. She had mentioned that cell reception at her sister's rural home was spotty, but it added to my growing unease. That evening, I met with Detective Thabo Ndlovu at a quiet restaurant in a neighboring suburb where we were unlikely to be recognized. He was a serious, thoughtful man in his 40s, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Okafor," he greeted me. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. Miriam has told me some concerning things about your late husband's activities. Please, call me Amara," I said. "And yes, I've discovered some disturbing information since Simon's death. I'm still trying to make sense of it all." Thabo nodded sympathetically. "May I ask what prompted your initial investigation? Miriam mentioned you found financial irregularities in your husband's records." I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this police officer, even if he was family by marriage and meeting me unofficially. "It started with the discovery of Simon's other family," I admitted. "Grace Mensah and their son, Kofi. Once I learned he'd been living a double life, I began to wonder what else he might have been hiding. The financial discrepancies became apparent when I went through his accounts after his death." Thabo took notes as I spoke. "And when did you become aware of Ibrahim Okonkwo's connection to your husband?" I explained about Michael Adebayo and what he had told me about Simon's role in moving money for powerful people, including Okonkwo. "This Michael Adebayo?" Thabo said thoughtfully. "How well do you know him? Can he be trusted?" "I only met him after Simon's death," I admitted. "He claims to have been Simon's friend, an occasional business associate. He knew about Grace and Kofi, and about Simon's unofficial financial activities. Beyond that, I can't say for certain how trustworthy he is." Thabo made another note. "And now someone has threatened you through Ms. Mensah, and is using your late husband's email account to continue his operations. Is that correct?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Michael believes it's someone who had access to Simon's passwords and methods. Someone who knows the business well enough to impersonate him convincingly to his contacts. Which brings us to the connection between Ms. Mensah and Ibrahim Okonkwo," Thabo said. "It's a significant coincidence that she previously worked directly under the man who later became one of your husband's most important clients." "Too significant to be a coincidence?" I asked. Thabo spread his hands. "That's what we need to determine. There are several possibilities here. Ms. Mensah might have been placed in your husband's path deliberately, as Miriam mentioned. Or she might have been the one to connect Okonkwo with your husband when Okonkwo needed to move money out of Nigeria. Or it might genuinely be a coincidence. Nigeria isn't that large a country when you're talking about the upper levels of government and business. What do you recommend?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the complexities of the situation. "First, I think we need to verify Ms. Mensah's current whereabouts and activities," Thabo said. "If she is indeed in Durban with her son, as she told you, that would suggest she's not directly involved in whatever is happening with your husband's email account. If she's not where she claims to be," he left the implication hanging. I nodded, understanding his reasoning. "Second," he continued, "we need to get access to that email account, as you and Mr. Adebayo discussed. If we can see what communications are being sent and to whom, it might help identify who's behind this. And third," I prompted, sensing he had more to say. Thabo's expression became grave. "Third, I think you should consider leaving Cape Town temporarily, Amara. Whoever sent that threat to Ms. Mensah might decide to target you directly next. If they believe you have information or access that could threaten their operation, You're in danger. It was the same advice Grace and Michael had given me, but coming from a police detective, it carried more weight. Still, I was reluctant to abandon my investigation just when we seemed to be making progress. I understand the risk, I said carefully. But if I disappear now, whoever is behind this might simply continue their activities unchallenged. They might also target others close to Simon, like his business partners or employees, looking for the information or access they think I have. Thabo considered this. You make a valid point. Perhaps instead of leaving, we should set a trap. Make it appear that you have discovered something significant, something the person behind this would want to prevent from becoming public. Draw them out in a controlled situation where we can identify and apprehend them. The idea was both frightening and appealing. If we could lure the person behind the threats into revealing themselves, we might finally get answers about Simon's secret life and the danger now facing me and potentially Grace and Kofi as well. How would we do that? I asked. Thabo outlined a plan. I would let it be known through carefully placed conversations that I had found a hidden safe deposit box containing documents related to Simon's financial activities. The implication would be that these documents could expose whoever was continuing Simon's operations and potentially implicate them in illegal activities. We'll need to be very careful about how this information is leaked, Thabo cautioned. It should appear to be accidental, something you let slip to someone who might pass it on to our target, and we'll need to ensure your safety throughout. I'll arrange for surveillance of your home and workplace, and you should have someone with you at all times. I thought about Thembeka, who was arriving the next day to stay with me. My cousin will be living with me for the next few weeks, I told him. But I don't want to put her in danger. We can place an undercover officer as additional household staff, Thabo suggested. Someone who can be present without alerting your cousin to the full situation. And I'll make sure you have direct access to me at all times. We spent the next hour refining the plan. I would accidentally mention the safe deposit box to Thomas Kumalo, Simon's business partner and the new managing director of the company, during our scheduled meeting the following week. If Thomas was the one using Simon's email account, he might act on this information directly. If not, he might mention it to others in the company or to Simon's business contacts, eventually reaching our target. Meanwhile, Thabo would try to verify Grace's whereabouts in Durban, and Michael would continue working on accessing Simon's email account. We would meet again in 3 days to assess any developments. As I drove home that night, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Fear, certainly, at the danger I was potentially facing. Determination to uncover the truth about Simon and to protect myself and Kofi. But also a growing sense of doubt about Grace. Had I been too quick to trust her? Was her apparent concern for my safety genuine, or part of a more complex deception? I remembered how Grace had appeared at my door the night of the threatening text message, her face etched with worry. I remembered how she had insisted I come with them to Durban, how she had seemed genuinely afraid for both of us. Had that all been an act? And if so, what was her true motivation? The questions plagued me as I tried to sleep that night. My mind, cycling through possibilities and scenarios without reaching any satisfying conclusions. By morning, I had resolved to reserve judgment about Grace until we had more information. The connection to Okonkwo was suspicious, but it didn't prove her involvement in anything illegal or dangerous. Thembeka arrived the next afternoon, bringing energy and distraction to my too-quiet house. My cousin was 10 years younger than me, a fashion designer with a vibrant personality and a talent for lifting spirits. She knew Simon had died and that I'd discovered he had another family, but I had spared her the details about his shadowy financial activities and the current danger. "This place needs some life," she declared, walking through my living room with a critical eye. "No wonder you've been feeling low, Amara. It's like a mausoleum in here." I smiled despite myself. "I've had other things on my mind besides interior decorating, Thembi." "Well, that's why I'm here," she announced cheerfully. "To help you focus on living again. Starting with a complete refresh of this space. New curtains, new throw pillows, maybe even new furniture. What do you think?" I thought about Thabo's plan about the trap we were setting and the potential danger it might bring directly to my home. Maybe hold off on any major purchases until we see how things go, I suggested. But I wouldn't mind some new color in here. Simon always preferred neutral tones. Thambika beamed. Perfect. We'll start with accessories. Tomorrow we'll go shopping, and by the time I leave, this place will feel completely different. New beginnings, right? Right, I agreed, touched by her enthusiasm and her obvious desire to help me move forward. If only she knew how complicated those new beginnings might be. That evening, I received a text from Michael. Got access. Call when safe to talk. My heart raced as I read the message. He had gotten into Simon's email account, the one being used by whoever was impersonating him. This could be the breakthrough we needed. I waited until Thambika was in the shower, then stepped out onto my back patio to call Michael. What did you find? I asked without preamble when he answered. It's worse than we thought, Michael said, his voice tense. Whoever is using Simon's account has been systematically emptying the offshore accounts where clients like Okonkwo had parked their funds. They're transferring everything to new accounts, then covering their tracks by sending fake confirmations that make it appear the money is still where it was deposited. How much are we talking about? Millions, Michael said grimly. And the transfers are accelerating. Just yesterday, they moved over $5 million from an account in the Cayman Islands to one in Singapore. It's like they're in a hurry to clean everything out. Can you tell who's doing it? Is there anything in the emails that identifies them? Not directly, Michael admitted, but I've been analyzing the language patterns in the messages, comparing them to emails Simon sent when he was alive. Whoever is writing these knows Simon's style well, but there are subtle differences. They use certain phrases he never did, avoid others he used frequently. Could it be one of his business partners? Thomas Kumalo, maybe? Possibly, Michael said. But it could also be someone from the financial side who worked with him on these transactions. Someone like his accountant or a banker he trusted. The emails show intimate knowledge of international banking procedures and the specific expectations of Simon's clients. I thought about the possibilities. What about his lawyer, David Nkosi? Would he have had this kind of knowledge and access? Nkosi knew about the legitimate business and about Grace and Kofi, but I don't believe Simon involved him in the unofficial financial operations. It would have put Nkosi in an ethically compromising position as an officer of the court. I wasn't convinced. Lawyers had been known to cross ethical lines before, especially for wealthy clients, and Nkosi had been surprisingly well informed about all aspects of Simon's life, even the parts Simon had kept compartmentalized from others. Is there any indication in the emails of a connection to Grace? I asked, remembering Thabo's revelation about her previous employment under Ibrahim Okonkwo. Not that I've seen, Michael said. Why do you ask? I hesitated, unsure whether to share what Thabo had discovered with Michael. While he had been helpful, I still wasn't certain of his loyalties or his complete honesty. Just covering all possibilities, I said evasively. Grace knew Simon's passwords for some of his accounts. She might have had more access than we realize. Michael seemed to accept this explanation. I'll keep looking for any mention of her in the emails. In the meantime, be careful with your plan to mention the safe deposit box. If whoever is behind this thinks you have evidence that could expose them, they might decide you're too dangerous to leave alive. His blunt assessment sent a chill through me. I'm being careful, I assured him. Detective Ndlovu is arranging protection, and my cousin is staying with me. Good. I'll be in touch as soon as I have more information from the email account. After hanging up, I stood in my garden for a few minutes, breathing in the night air and trying to calm my racing thoughts. The situation was escalating rapidly. Millions of dollars were being stolen from some very dangerous people, all under the cover of Simon's identity and connections. When those people discovered the theft of Flash, and they would, eventually, they would look for someone to blame and punish. I needed to find out who was behind this before that happened. Or Grace. Kofi, and I might all become targets for vengeance, regardless of our actual involvement. The trap Thabo had proposed was risky, but it might be our best chance to identify the culprit quickly. The next few days passed in a strange juxtaposition of normalcy and tension. On the surface, I went about my regular life, working at the hospital, shopping with Thembeka for new home accessories, meeting with Simon's business partners about the company's future. But beneath this ordinary routine, I was constantly alert for signs of danger or surveillance, always aware that my next move could potentially put me in the crosshairs of whoever had threatened Grace. Thabo had arranged for an undercover officer, a woman named Nomsa, to be hired as a temporary housekeeper while Thembeka was staying with me. Nomsa was actually a trained police detective, and her presence in the house provided some security, while also giving Thabo a direct line to what was happening in my daily life. On Thursday, I had my scheduled meeting with Thomas Kumalo to discuss the quarterly performance of Simon's medical supply company. This was when I planned to accidentally mention the safe deposit box, setting Thabo's trap in motion. Thomas and I met in his office at the company headquarters, a modern building in Cape Town's business district. He was a tall, distinguished man in his late 50s who had been with the company since its early days. Simon had always spoken highly of his business acumen and integrity. "The transition has been smoother than I expected," Thomas told me as we reviewed the quarterly reports. "Simon had excellent systems in place, and the clients have remained loyal despite his passing. We're actually projecting a 15% increase in revenue for the next quarter." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. Whatever else Simon might have been involved in, the legitimate business he had built was thriving and providing employment for over 100 people. Simon would be pleased. Thomas nodded, his expression somber. He built something truly valuable here. I'm committed to honoring his legacy by continuing to grow the company along the principles he established. This seemed like the perfect opening. I took a deep breath and launched into the prepared narrative Thabo and I had crafted. "Speaking of Simon's legacy," I said, trying to sound casual, "I found something interesting yesterday. I was going through some old papers and came across a key to a safe deposit box I didn't know about. The bank confirmed it's still active and was last accessed by Simon about a week before he died." Thomas's expression remained politely interested, betraying no particular concern or excitement. "Do you know what's in it?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I'm planning to go to the bank tomorrow to look. Simon was always organized about his affairs, so I'm guessing it contains important documents of some kind. Maybe business-related, given the timing of his last visit." "Would you like me to accompany you?" Thomas offered. "If there are business documents, I might be able to help interpret their significance." The offer took me by surprise. It seemed either genuinely helpful or suspiciously eager, depending on Thomas's motives. "That's very kind," I said carefully, "but I think I'd prefer to go alone first, just in case it contains personal items. If there's anything related to the business, I'll certainly bring it to you afterward." Thomas nodded, accepting my decision without protest. "Of course. Let me know if you need any assistance once you've seen the contents." The rest of our meeting proceeded normally, with no further mention of the safe deposit box. As I left, I couldn't determine whether Thomas had taken the bait or not. His reaction had been measured and appropriate. Exactly what you'd expect from a respected business executive offering support to his late partner's widow. Either he was not the person using Simon's email account, or he was an exceptional actor. I reported the conversation to Thabo that evening, describing Thomas's reaction in detail. "It's inconclusive," Thabo agreed. "His offer to accompany you could be innocent, or it could be an attempt to see what evidence you might have found. We'll need to watch him carefully over the next few days to see if he takes any unusual actions or makes any suspicious calls." "What about Grace?" I asked. "Have you been able to verify her whereabouts?" Thabo nodded. "She's definitely in Durban, staying at a house registered to her sister in a rural area about 30 miles outside the city. One of my colleagues in the Durban department did a discreet drive-by yesterday, and confirmed seeing a woman matching Grace's description with a young boy in the front yard. This news was reassuring. Whatever Grace's past connection to Okonkwo might have been, she appeared to be exactly where she claimed to be, keeping Kofi safe as we had discussed. It didn't rule out her involvement entirely. She could be coordinating with someone in Cape Town remotely, but it made it less likely that she was directly behind the current activities. "Any updates on the email account?" Thabo asked. I shared what Michael had told me about the systematic emptying of offshore accounts and the millions of dollars being moved. Thabo looked alarmed. "This is escalating faster than I anticipated," he said gravely. "Whoever is behind this is stealing enormous sums from very dangerous people. When they discover the theft, they'll come looking for retribution. And you could be in the crosshairs as Simon's widow and the presumed inheritor of his operations." "What should we do?" I asked, feeling a fresh wave of fear at the urgency in his tone. Thabo considered for a moment. "We need to accelerate our plan. Instead of waiting to see if Thomas or someone else approaches you about the safe deposit box, let's create a more immediate catalyst. Tomorrow, you'll go to the bank as you mentioned to Thomas. We'll have officers watching to see if anyone follows you. Then you'll come out looking visibly upset or concerned, as if you found something disturbing in the box. And then you'll go directly to a lawyer's office. Not Simon's lawyer, but a new one we'll arrange. This will suggest you're taking legal action based on what you found. It should force whoever is behind this to make a move quickly, before you can expose them. The plan was risky, essentially using me as bait, but I understood the necessity. Time was running out before the thefts were discovered by Okonkwo and others like him, potentially putting me in even greater danger. "I'll do it," I agreed. "But I'm worried about Thembeka. If someone comes after me, she could be caught in the crossfire." "We'll arrange for her to be out of the house tomorrow," Thabo promised. "A day spa, perhaps. Something that would keep her away for several hours without raising her suspicions." I nodded, relieved. She'd love that. I'll tell her it's a thank you gift for coming to stay with me. The next morning, I dropped Thembeka off at an exclusive spa for a full day of treatments. A generous gift that she accepted with delight and no suspicion. Then I drove to the bank, acutely aware of the unmarked police car following at a discreet distance for my protection. At the bank, I actually did access a safe deposit box A, one that Simon had maintained, but that I had already checked shortly after his death. It contained only some family jewelry and old photographs, nothing related to his secret financial activities. But for the purpose of our plan, I spent about 20 minutes in the private room with the box, enough time to suggest I was reviewing documents or other significant contents. When I emerged, I carefully arranged my features into an expression of shock and concern, clutching my purse tightly as if it contained something valuable and disturbing. I made a show of asking the bank manager for a recommendation for a good lawyer specializing in financial crimes, speaking just loudly enough to be overheard by others in the bank lobby. From there, I drove directly to the office of Maria Delport. A lawyer Thabo had arranged for me to meet. She was aware of the broad outlines of our plan, but not the specific details, having been told only that I needed to appear to be consulting a lawyer about potential financial crimes I had uncovered. I spent an hour in Maria's office, enough time to suggest a substantive legal consultation. When I left, I made sure to be carrying a legal-sized envelope that appeared to contain documents, actually blank papers, and to look determined and resolute, as if I had made an important decision based on legal advice. The performance complete, I drove home, still followed discreetly by the police surveillance team. Nomsa, our undercover officer posing as a housekeeper, was waiting for me, having been briefed by Thabo about the plan. "Any sign of anyone watching the house?" I asked her as soon as I was inside. "Nothing obvious," she reported. "But there's a car that's driven by twice in the last hour. A black Mercedes with tinted windows. Didn't stop, just cruised past slowly. Could be nothing, but I logged the license plate just in case." I nodded, appreciating her thoroughness. "Thembeka won't be back until around 6. Has Detective Ndlovu said what he expects to happen next?" He thinks whoever took the bait might make a move tonight, Numsa said. They'll want to act quickly, before you can do whatever they think you're planning to do with what you found. We have officers positioned around the neighborhood, and I'll be here with you. Detective Ndlovu is also on standby, ready to respond immediately if needed. I tried to calm my racing heart, reminding myself that this was the plan to draw out whoever was behind the threats and the theft of millions from Simon's clients. But knowing I was deliberately making myself a target was terrifying, even with police protection. What should I do now? I asked Numsa. Act normal, she advised. Make dinner, watch TV, do whatever you would typically do in the evening, but stay away from windows as much as possible, and make sure all doors and windows are locked securely. I followed her advice, preparing a simple dinner and trying to distract myself with a book, though I found it impossible to concentrate on the words. Thembeka returned around 6, full of stories about her spa day and blissfully unaware of the tension humming through the house. By 9 o'clock, nothing had happened. Thembeka had gone to bed, tired from her day of pampering, and Numsa and I sat in the kitchen, speaking in low voices to avoid waking her. Maybe they didn't take the bait, I suggested, both disappointed and relieved. Or maybe they're waiting until later, when they think you'll be asleep, Numsa countered. Most break-ins happen between midnight and 4 a.m., when people are in their deepest sleep. This wasn't particularly reassuring, but I appreciated her honesty. Should I try to sleep? Or stay up? Try to rest, she recommended. I'll keep watch. If anything happens, I'll wake you immediately. I retired to my bedroom but left my clothes on, knowing sleep would be impossible under the circumstances. I lay on top of the covers, listening to the normal nighttime sounds of the house and trying to distinguish them from any unusual noises that might indicate an intruder. It was just after 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Michael. Check your email now. Urgent. I quickly opened my email app and found a new message from Michael, sent just moments before. It contained a forwarded email from Simon's account, one that had been sent earlier that evening. Ibrahim, I've received information that Simon's widow has discovered documentation of our arrangements in a safe deposit box. She consulted a lawyer today and appears to be preparing to take this information to authorities. This could expose all of our previous transactions. I recommend immediate action to secure these documents and ensure her silence. I can handle this matter tonight if you authorize additional compensation for the risk involved. Awaiting your instructions. And below this forwarded message was a note from Michael. They're coming for you tonight. Whoever is using Simon's account has used your visit to the bank and lawyer to justify eliminating you. They've made it look like Okonkwo ordered the hit. Get out of the house now. I'm on my way to you. My blood turned to ice as I read the message. I immediately called Nomsa, who answered on the first ring. Someone's coming tonight, I told her, my voice shaking. They've contacted Okonkwo, making it look like he's ordering them to silence me. How do you know this? She asked sharply. Michael Adebayo forwarded me an email from Simon's account. Whoever is using it is planning to kill me and make it look like Okonkwo's revenge. I'm calling Thabo now, Nomsa said. Wake your cousin and get ready to leave. We need to get you both to a safe location immediately. I hurried to Thembeka's room and shook her awake. Thembi, I'm sorry, but we need to leave right now. I'll explain later, but it's an emergency. To her credit, my cousin asked no questions, immediately getting up and pulling on clothes and shoes. Within minutes, we were both ready, waiting in the hallway as Nomsa spoke urgently on the phone with Thabo. He's sending additional officers, she reported as she hung up. They'll be here in minutes. We're to wait inside until they arrive, then they'll escort us to a safe house. But before the backup could arrive, we heard the sound of breaking glass from the back of the house. Someone had forced entry through a window or door. Bedroom now, Nomsa ordered in a whisper, drawing her service weapon. Lock the door and push furniture in front of it. Don't come out until I or another officer calls for you. I pulled a frightened Thembeka into my bedroom, locking the door behind us. Together, we pushed my heavy dresser in front of the door, creating a barricade that would at least slow down an intruder. Amara, what is happening? Thembeka whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Who is that woman? Why does she have a gun? Why is someone breaking into your house? I'll explain everything later, I promised. Right now, we need to stay quiet and wait for the police. We crouched in the far corner of the room, listening intently. We heard footsteps in the hallway, then Nomsa's voice calling out, "Police! Freeze!" Followed by the sound of a struggle and a single gunshot that made both of us flinch. Then, silence. Terrible, stretching silence that seemed to last an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Had Nomsa been shot? Was the intruder now coming for us? A voice called out, not Nomsa's, but a man's. "Mrs. Okafor, are you in there? It's Detective Ndlovu. You're safe now." Still, I hesitated. "How do I know it's really you?" I called. "Back! Miriam's favorite dessert is chocolate mousse with raspberries," he replied, offering a detail only the real Thabo would know from family gatherings, and she always complains that I eat more than my share. Relief flooded through me. I helped Thembeka move the dresser, then unlocked the door to find Thabo standing there, his weapon holstered, but his expression grim. "Are you both all right?" he asked, his eyes quickly scanning us for injuries. We nodded, and I looked past him down the hallway. "Nomsa, is she—" "She's fine," Thabo assured me. "She managed to subdue the intruder. He's in custody, being treated for a minor shoulder wound where her bullet grazed him. My officers are with him now." "Who is he?" I asked, my voice shaking, despite my relief. "Who sent him?" Thabo's expression became even more serious. "That's where things get complicated. The intruder is a known enforcer, someone who does cleanup work for certain business interests. But he claims he was hired by Michael Adebayo." I stared at Thabo, trying to process what he had just told me. "Michael? But that's impossible. He's the one who warned me about the attack. He forwarded me the email from Simon's account, telling me to get out of the house." Thabo nodded, looking troubled. "So you said, which makes this even more perplexing. Either the intruder is lying about who hired him, or Michael set the whole thing up," I finished, the possibility dawning on me with horrible clarity. "He warned me about an attack he himself had arranged, making himself look like my protector while actually being behind it all." "It's a possibility we need to consider," Thabo agreed grimly. "Especially given his text saying he was on his way to you. If he arrived after the intruder had completed his task, he could have positioned himself as having tried to save you but arrived too late." The thought made me feel physically ill. I had been beginning to trust Michael, to see him as an ally in understanding Simon's secret life. Had he been manipulating me all along? "Where is Michael now?" I asked. "That's another concern," Thabo said. "We have officers watching for him, but he hasn't appeared. His phone is going straight to voicemail." Thembeka, who had been listening to this exchange with growing confusion and alarm, finally broke in. "Will someone please tell me what is going on? Who is trying to kill you, Amara? And why?" I looked at my cousin's frightened face and felt a wave of guilt for involving her, however unwittingly, in this dangerous situation. "It's a long story, Thembi, and I promise to tell you everything. But right now, we need to get somewhere safe." Thabo nodded in agreement. "I have a secure location prepared. We should leave immediately, in case there are others coming. The intruder might have been working with a partner." We quickly gathered essential items, Yabuar medications, phone chargers, a change of clothes, Idyur, and followed Thabo out to an unmarked police vehicle. As we drove away from my home, I saw several police cars parked on the street and officers, establishing a perimeter around the property. The reality of what had just happened, that someone had broken into my home intending to kill me, hit me with fresh force, and I began to shake uncontrollably. Then Becca put her arm around me, her earlier fear now transformed into concern for me. "It's okay," she murmured. "We're safe now. Whatever this is about, we'll figure it out together." I leaned into her embrace, grateful for her support, even though she had no idea of the full situation. In the front seat, Thabo spoke quietly into his radio, updating his team and issuing instructions for the continued search for Michael Adebayo. The safe house turned out to be a small, modern apartment in a secure building with underground parking and 24-hour security. 2 plainclothes officers were already there when we arrived, having prepared the space for our arrival. Once inside, with the door locked and secured, I finally told Thembeka everything. Simon's secret family, his shadowy financial activities, the threatening message to Grace, and our plan to trap whoever was behind it all. She listened with increasing astonishment, occasionally interrupting with questions, but mostly just absorbing the shocking story. "All this time," she said when I finished, "you've been dealing with this alone? Why didn't you tell me sooner, Amara?" "I wanted to protect you," I explained. And honestly, I was embarrassed. My entire marriage was based on lies I never suspected. I felt like a fool. Thembeka squeezed my hand. "You're not a fool. Simon was just exceptionally good at deception. And from what you've told me, he had help from this Michael person, at the very least, and possibly others." Her easy acceptance and support brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you for not judging me," I whispered. "Judge you? For what? Being betrayed? That's not your fault, Amara." She turned to Thabo, who had been quietly allowing us our moment. "So what happens now, Detective? Do you think this Michael person is the one who's been using Simon's email?" Thabo nodded thoughtfully. "It's looking increasingly likely. He had access to Simon's passwords, knew his business methods, and was familiar with his clients like Okonkwo. He's been playing both sides, was helping Amara investigate while simultaneously stealing millions from Simon's clients, and now apparently trying to eliminate her as a threat." "But why warn me about the attack?" I asked, still confused by that aspect of Michael's actions. "Why not just let the intruder kill me?" "Insurance," Thabo suggested. If something went wrong and the attack failed, he could point to his warning as proof he wasn't involved. It was a win-win strategy from his perspective. If the attack succeeded, you'd be eliminated as a threat to his operation. If it failed, he'd appear to be your ally who tried to save you. It made a horrible kind of sense. "Do you think he's the one who sent the threatening message to Grace too?" "Quite possibly," Thabo agreed. "It would have been another way to manipulate you, to make you afraid and reactive, less likely to notice inconsistencies in his story or question his motives." "What about Grace?" I asked suddenly, remembering her connection to Okonkwo. "Could she be working with Michael?" Thabo considered this. "It's possible, though her continued presence in Durban makes it less likely she's actively involved in what's happening now. But she might have been part of the initial setup, given her previous employment with Okonkwo. We need to warn her," I insisted. "If Michael is behind all this, and he knows where she is, she and Kofi could be in danger too." Thabo nodded. "I'll have my colleague in Durban check on them immediately. In the meantime, you both should try to get some rest. It's been a traumatic night, and tomorrow will likely be challenging as well. We'll need to question the intruder more thoroughly and continue searching for Michael. Though I doubted I could sleep, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally." Thembeka and I retired to the apartment's 2 bedrooms, with one of the officers remaining awake to stand guard. Despite my exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the imagined scene of the intruder breaking into my home, coming to kill me on Michael's orders. I thought about how thoroughly I had been deceived. First by Simon, who had lived a triple life for years without my knowledge, and then by Michael, who had presented himself as a friend while potentially orchestrating my death. I must have eventually drifted off, because I woke with a start to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, I was disoriented. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. I checked my phone, and was surprised to see it was already past 9 in the morning. In the apartment's small kitchen, I found Thabo speaking quietly with his officers while Thembeka made coffee. They all looked up as I entered. "Any news?" I asked, accepting the mug of coffee Thembeka handed me. Thabo nodded, his expression serious but with a hint of satisfaction. "Several developments, actually. First, the intruder has confirmed that Michael Adebayo hired him to retrieve documents from your home and eliminate any witnesses. He was told, specifically to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. So Michael is definitely behind it all," I said, feeling a strange mix of relief at having confirmation and betrayal at having been so thoroughly manipulated. "It appears so," Thabo agreed. "And there's more. We've managed to track Michael's cell phone to a private airstrip outside Cape Town. It seems he was planning to leave the country last night on a chartered flight to Dubai, but the flight was delayed due to mechanical issues. We have officers en route to the airstrip now to apprehend him." My heart raced at this news. "Do you think he'll be caught?" "I'm optimistic," Thabo said. "The plane is still grounded for repairs, and we have the element of surprise. Michael doesn't know his hired man was captured, or that we've identified him as the mastermind." "And Grace?" I asked. "Kofi. Are they safe?" My colleague in Durban confirmed they're still at the sister's house and appear to be unharmed. As a precaution, he's maintaining surveillance of the property until we have Michael in custody. This was reassuring, though it didn't completely alleviate my concerns about Grace's possible involvement in the earlier stages of the deception. "There's one more thing," Thabo continued. "The intruder had a thumb drive on him when he was captured. It contains instructions about what documents to look for in your home, along with backup plans if you weren't there, or if the documents couldn't be found." "What kind of documents?" I asked, puzzled. "I don't have anything incriminating related to Simon's activities." "According to the instructions, Michael believed you had found evidence in that safe deposit box, all records of the offshore accounts. He's been emptying, perhaps, or documentation of Simon's clients and their transactions. The intruder was supposed to retrieve these documents before killing you, making it look like a robbery where you interrupted the thief and were killed in the struggle." I shuddered at how methodically my murder had been planned. But there were no such documents. The safe deposit box story was just bait for our trap. "Exactly," Thabo said. "But Michael believed it was real, which suggests he wasn't as close to Simon's operations as he wanted us to think. If he had been Simon's full partner in these financial activities, he would have known exactly what documentation existed and where it was kept." This was an interesting insight. "So he might have been more of a facilitator than a full partner? Someone Simon used but didn't fully trust?" "That's my theory," Thabo confirmed. "And after Simon's death, Michael saw an opportunity to take over the operation completely, emptying the accounts before anyone could stop him. When you started investigating, you became a threat to his plans. It made sense. Michael had known enough about Simon's activities to be dangerous, but not enough to be completely confident in his takeover. My investigations had made him nervous, leading to the threatening message to Grace, and eventually the attempt on my life." "What happens now?" Thembeka asked, bringing the conversation back to practical matters. "How long will we need to stay? In hiding?" Thabo considered this. "If we apprehend Michael today, as I expect we will, the immediate threat should be neutralized. However, there's still the matter of Okonkwo and the other clients whose money has been stolen. Once they discover the theft, they may still come looking for answers, and Amara could be a target as Simon's widow." "So this isn't over," I concluded, feeling a weight settle in my chest. "Even if you catch Michael, I'll still be in danger from Simon's clients." "Potentially," Thabo acknowledged. "But there are steps we can take to mitigate that risk. With Michael in custody, we'll have evidence of who was really behind the theft of their funds. We can work with international authorities to freeze the stolen money before it disappears completely, which might appease Okonkwo and others somewhat." It wasn't the clean resolution I had hoped for, but it was better than nothing. At least with Michael captured, the immediate threat would be removed. Around noon, Thabo received a call that had him grinning as he hung up. "They've got him," he announced triumphantly. Michael was apprehended at the airstrip trying to board the repaired plane. He had luggage containing over $500,000 in cash and multiple false passports. He's being brought in for questioning now. The news brought a rush of relief so intense it made me dizzy. The man who had ordered my death was in custody. The immediate danger had passed. "When can we go home?" I asked. "Not quite yet," Thabo cautioned. "I'd like to question Michael first, to confirm he was acting alone and not working with anyone else who might still pose a threat. It should only take a few hours. In the meantime, you're both safer here." So we waited, Thembeka and I playing cards to pass the time while Thabo worked remotely, coordinating with his team and preparing for Michael's interrogation. By late afternoon, he had news. "Michael has made a partial confession," he reported. "He admits to using Simon's email account to continue financial operations and to stealing from the offshore accounts, but he denies ordering the attack on you. He claims the intruder is lying about who hired him." "Do you believe him?" I asked. Thabo shook his head. "Not really. We have evidence linking him to the intruder off phone records showing calls between them, a payment from one of Michael's accounts to the intruders 2 days ago. He's trying to minimize his culpability, but the facts don't support his denial." "What about Grace? Did he mention any connection to her?" "He claims they've had no contact since Simon's death, apart from seeing her briefly at the funeral. He insists she knows nothing about the financial operations or his activities since Simon died." I wasn't entirely convinced, given Grace's past employment under Okonkwo, but I was relieved that Michael wasn't implicating her. For Kofi's sake, if nothing else, I hoped she truly was innocent of any involvement in the criminal aspects of Simon's life. "So what now?" I asked. "Is it safe for us to return home?" Thabo considered this. "With Michael in custody and the intruder cooperating with our investigation, I believe the immediate threat has passed. However, I would still recommend caution. Perhaps stay with friends for another day or two while we conduct a thorough search of your home to ensure it's secure, and I'd suggest upgrading your security system when you do return." The thought of returning to the house where someone had broken in intending to kill me was unsettling, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. This was my home, the place I had shared with Simon for decades. Despite everything I had learned about him, despite the danger his secret life had brought to my door, I wasn't ready to abandon it. "I'll stay with Amara," Thembeka offered. "At least for a few more weeks. I don't want you to be alone, cousin. Not after everything that's happened." I smiled gratefully at her. "Thank you, Thembi. I'd like that very much." The next day, after Thabo's team had thoroughly searched and secured my house, we returned home. The broken window had been boarded up temporarily, and there were still signs of the police investigation. Fingerprint dust on surfaces, evidence markers where the struggle between Nomsa and the intruder had taken place. But it was still my home, and being back within its familiar walls brought a comfort I hadn't expected. Over the following weeks, life began to establish a new pattern. Michael Adebayo was formally charged with multiple crimes, including conspiracy to commit murder, grand theft, fraud, and money laundering. The evidence against him was substantial, and his attempts to shift blame grew increasingly desperate as more details emerged. It turned out that Michael had been systematically stealing from Simon's clients for years, even before Simon's death. Small amounts at first, skimmed from transactions Simon had trusted him to handle, then larger sums as his confidence grew. After Simon died, he saw an opportunity to clean out the accounts completely before disappearing with millions of dollars. My investigation into Simon's financial records had threatened to expose his long-running scheme, leading to the threatening message to Grace and ultimately, the attempt on my life. What Michael hadn't anticipated was that I would have police protection, or that his hired intruder would be captured alive and able to implicate him. Thabo kept me updated on the case's progress, including the international efforts to recover the stolen funds. Many of Simon's clients, including Ibrahim Okonkwo, were cooperating with authorities discreetly, eager to recover their money even, if it meant revealing some of their own questionable financial practices. Okonkwo has specifically requested a meeting with you, Thabo told me one afternoon, about a month after Michael's arrest. He's been granted temporary immunity from prosecution in exchange for his cooperation in recovering the stolen funds and testifying against Michael. The idea of meeting the man who had been one of Simon's most important clients, a corrupt official who had stolen millions from Nigeria's health ministry, was intimidating. But I was also curious to hear what he had to say. Is it safe to meet? With him? I asked. He'll be under police supervision the entire time, Thabo assured me. And the meeting would take place at a secure location. I think it might provide valuable closure for you, Amara. A chance to understand more about Simon's activities from someone who was directly involved with him. After consideration, I agreed to the meeting. A few days later, I found myself sitting across from Ibrahim Okonkwo in a private room at the police headquarters. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, with an air of authority that made it easy to imagine him as a powerful government official. Mrs. Okafor, he greeted me, his voice cultured and his English precisely articulated. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know this must be difficult for you. Mr. Okonkwo, I acknowledged with a nod, unsure how to address a man who had both been robbed of millions and was himself under investigation for corruption. May I ask why you wanted to see me? Several reasons, he said, folding his hands on the table between us. First, to express my condolences on your husband's death. Simon was a man of extraordinary talents and discretion. His services were invaluable to me and to many others in positions requiring financial flexibility. I noted his euphemism for what had essentially been money laundering, but didn't comment on it. You knew my husband well as anyone outside his family, I believe, Okonkwo said. We worked together for nearly a decade. I trusted him, implicitly, which is a rare thing in my experience. Simon understood the delicate nature of our arrangements and the importance of absolute confidentiality. Did you know about his other family? I asked directly. About Grace and Kofi? Okonkwo's expression revealed nothing. I was aware that Simon had a relationship with Ms. Mensah, yes. It would have been difficult to maintain such a significant secret from someone with whom he conducted regular business in Nairobi. And did you know Grace before she met Simon? From her time working at the Nigerian health ministry under you? Now Okonkwo looked surprised, the first crack in his composed facade. You're well informed, Mrs. Okafor. Yes. Grace worked in my department, many years ago. She was an excellent employee, very detail-oriented and discreet. When she left to pursue opportunities in the private sector, I provided a recommendation that helped her secure her position as a pharmaceutical representative. Was it a coincidence that she later became involved with Simon, who was helping you move money out of Nigeria? I pressed, watching his reaction carefully. Okonkwo smiled slightly, as if appreciating my directness. There are few true coincidences in this world, Mrs. Okafor. Let us say that I recognize potential synergies in bringing together two individuals who might complement each other's skills and situation. The implication was clear. Okonkwo had deliberately facilitated the connection between Grace and Simon, perhaps even encouraged their relationship to develop. But why? You engineered their relationship, I said, not bothering to phrase it as a question. To what end? What was your goal in bringing them together? Okonkwo spread his hands in a gesture that was half admission, half dismissal. Engineered is perhaps too strong a word. I saw possibilities and created opportunities for them to meet. What developed afterward was their choice entirely. But why? I persisted. What did you gain from their relationship? Security, Okonkwo said simply. Simon was handling increasingly large sums of money for me and others. Having a personal connection to someone in Nairobi, a city where much of our business was conducted, gave him additional motivation to be discreet and reliable. A man with a secret family has much to lose if his professional activities are exposed. It aligned his interests more closely with mine. The cold calculation behind his explanation made my stomach turn. He had deliberately encouraged Simon's infidelity, the creation of his second family, as a means of control, ensuring Simon would remain loyal and discreet in their illegal financial dealings. Did Grace know she was being used this way? I asked, thinking of the woman I had come to know over the past months, the mother who had fled with her son to protect him from danger. I doubt Simon ever told her the full extent of his financial activities, Okafor said. He was remarkably compartmentalized in how he managed his various relationships. But Grace is an intelligent woman. I suspect she understood there was more to Simon's business than he revealed, even if she didn't know the specifics. This matched my own impression of Grace from our conversations. She had admitted knowing Simon was keeping secrets, sensing there were parts of himself he never fully revealed to her. There's another reason I wanted to meet with you, Okafor continued, shifting the conversation. To assure you personally that you need not fear retribution from me or my associates. We are well aware that Michael Adebayo, not you, was responsible for the theft of our funds. With his arrest and the ongoing recovery efforts, we consider that matter separate from any connection you had to Simon. His words were clearly meant to be reassuring, but there was a subtle threat underlying theme. A reminder that he could have sought vengeance against me had the circumstances been different. I appreciate that clarification, I said carefully, though I had no knowledge of or involvement in my husband's financial activities while he was alive, nor in Mr. Adebayo's actions after his death. Of course, Okafor agreed smoothly. Your innocence in these matters has been established to my satisfaction, which brings me to my final reason for requesting this meeting, to discuss the future of certain assets that remain connected to Simon's operations. Assets? I asked, confused. I thought all the offshore accounts had been identified and were being monitored by authorities as part of the investigation. The accounts, yes, Okafor confirmed. But there are other assets, outdoor properties, businesses, investments that were purchased with funds Simon managed for his clients, including myself. These assets were held in complex corporate structures that Michael was apparently unaware of, which is why they weren't affected by his theft. I was stunned by this revelation. Even after everything that had been uncovered, there were still aspects of Simon's financial empire I knew nothing about. What does this have to do with me? I asked cautiously. As Simon's widow and the inheritor of his business interests, you have a legal claim to these assets, Okafor explained. However, morally speaking, they represent investments made with funds that originated from me and others like me. I am proposing a negotiated settlement, one that would provide you with significant compensation for relinquishing any claim to these assets while allowing the original investors to recover their property. I stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. You want to buy me out of ownership of assets I didn't even know existed? Assets purchased with money that was likely obtained illegally in the first place? Okafor smiled thinly. The origin of the funds is a complex legal matter that could be debated endlessly in courts across multiple jurisdictions. What I'm offering is a clean, simple resolution that benefits everyone involved. You receive substantial financial compensation without the legal complications of claiming these assets directly. My associates and I recover our investments without the publicity and legal exposure of a formal dispute. How substantial? I heard myself ask, immediately ashamed of the question. Was I actually considering profiting from Simon's illegal activities? $10 million, Okafor said without hesitation. Tax-free, deposited to an account of your choosing in exchange for signed documents relinquishing any claim to the assets in question. A fair price for what would otherwise be years of legal battles with uncertain outcomes. The figure was staggering. Far more than I could earn in my entire career as a nurse. But it was also blood money, profit from corruption and financial crimes that had likely harmed countless innocent people. I need time to consider this, I said finally, and to consult with my own legal advisors. Okonkwo nodded, unsurprised by my response. Of course. Take whatever time you need. The offer remains open indefinitely. Should you wish to discuss it further, Detective Ndlovu can arrange another meeting. As I left the police station after the meeting, my mind was reeling with everything. Okonkwo had revealed his deliberate engineering of Simon's relationship with Grace, the existence of hidden assets worth millions, and his offer to essentially buy my silence and cooperation. I called Grace that evening, needing to hear her perspective on Okonkwo's claims. She and Kofi had returned to Cape Town after Michael's arrest, once the immediate danger had passed. We had continued our bi-weekly brunches, gradually building a relationship that, while still complicated, had elements of genuine friendship. He admits he introduced us deliberately, Grace confirmed after I related Okonkwo's statements. Though at the time, I had no idea it was planned. I thought it was a coincidental meeting at the conference. Did you ever suspect why Okonkwo might have wanted you to meet Simon? I asked. Grace was silent for a moment. Not at first, she finally said. But later, after I discovered Simon was married to you, I began to wonder. Okonkwo had always been calculating in his business relationships. Nothing was ever truly coincidental with him. Do you think Simon knew that your meeting was arranged? I don't think so, Grace said. Not initially, at least. Simon was many things, but I believe his feelings for Mao and for Kofia were genuine. Whatever manipulations Okonkwo might have orchestrated, Simon's love for his son was real. I found this strangely comforting. The idea that amid all the deception and compartmentalization, Simon's love for his child had been authentic. It matched the Simon I had known, capable of genuine love alongside extraordinary deception. Over the following weeks, I consulted with legal advisors about Okonkwo's offer. The consensus was that while I did have legitimate claims to the assets as Simon's widow, pursuing those claims would be extraordinarily complex and potentially dangerous. Okonkwo and his associates were powerful people with resources to fight lengthy legal battles across multiple countries. Moreover, there was the moral question of whether I wanted to profit from assets that had been acquired through questionable means. Simon's legitimate business, the medical supply company, was thriving under Thomas Kumalo's management and providing me with a comfortable income. Did I need or want millions more that came with ethical complications? In the end, I decided to accept Okonkwo's offer, with modifications. I would relinquish any claim to the assets in exchange for $5 million, half his original offer. The other $5 million would be donated anonymously to healthcare initiatives in Nigeria, specifically targeting the regions most affected by the corruption in the health ministry during Okonkwo's tenure. When I presented these terms through Thabo, I expected resistance or outright rejection. Instead, Okonkwo accepted immediately, seeming almost amused by my attempt to transform some of his ill-gotten gains into positive works. Mrs. Okafor has her husband's shrewd negotiating skills, he commented to Thabo. A compromise that allows her to maintain moral high ground while still securing her financial future. Simon would have approved. I wasn't sure how I felt about that assessment. Was I truly Simon's widow, still influenced by his values and methods even as I tried to distance myself from his deceptions? Or was I simply making the best of an impossible situation, finding a middle ground that acknowledged the complex reality I had inherited? The money was transferred as agreed, with the donations to Nigerian healthcare initiatives handled through a reputable international foundation. I placed my portion in a trust, to be used primarily for my retirement needs, and eventually to establish a scholarship fund for nursing students specializing in pediatric care. With Michael awaiting trial and the financial matters resolved, life began to settle into a new pattern. Thembeka eventually returned to Johannesburg, though she visited frequently. I returned to work full-time at the hospital, finding solace in the routine and purpose of caring for sick children. Grace and Kofi became regular fixtures in my life. Our bi-weekly brunches expanded to include occasional dinners, movie outings, and even a weekend trip to a nature reserve that Kofi had been eager to visit. The boy who had once called me Mom now referred to me as Auntie Amara, a compromise that acknowledged our unique connection without perpetuating Simon's lies. One Sunday afternoon, about 6 months after Simon's death, Grace and I sat watching Kofi play in my garden while Thembeka, visiting for the weekend, prepared lunch inside. Dawen. You ever wonder what would have happened if Simon had lived? Grace asked suddenly. If his heart hadn't given out when it did, I had wondered this many times. He was planning to tell me about you and Kofi, I said. He left a video confession saying he couldn't continue living the lie. But I don't know how it would have played out if he'd actually gone through with it. Grace nodded thoughtfully. I've thought about it too. Would we have met under his guidance, with him trying to manage our reactions and emotions? Would he have expected us to become some kind of blended family, with him at the center? The image was both absurd and painful. Simon orchestrating a reunion between his wife and his partner, expecting us to accommodate his deception and create a new family structure that maintained his connection to both of us. I think it would have been a disaster, I said honestly. Any relationship between us that Simon engineered would have been built on his terms, centered around his needs and preferences. What we have now, complicated and imperfect as it is, at least belongs to us. We've created it ourselves without Simon's manipulation.